We're just delaying for a second or two until Councilmember Munns gets something out of her car. We'll be back. Good afternoon. It is 2 o'clock, and I will call the City Council workshop of September 27th, 2023 to order. This will be both a physical and a virtual meeting. Some members of staff and consultants are participating via teleconference. Today's meeting may be viewed live on YouTube, Facebook, and available for viewing after the meeting on cable channel 10 HD 1090. Public comment is not normally taken at workshop meetings, although council may allow or request public participation. We have no action items on today's agenda. Councilor Wiesner has let us know that he will attempt to participate virtually today. So far he hasn't logged on, but if he does, we'll let you know, and if he doesn't, we'll just excuse him. And Councilmember Marshall will be absent today. So first up, moving right along, we have Parks and Recreation, Marina Dredging Options Update. Project Manager Brett Arvidsson will present, and we also have our Parks and Rec Director Brian Smith and our Harbor Master Chris Sublett here as well. Thank you. Go ahead, Brett.
Good afternoon, Council. I'm Brett Arvidsson, Project Manager for the city. With me is Paul Sorensen from BST, who's our financial consultant in this. Online is Bill Gherkin from Moffitt Nickel, our consultant on this project. Here we're going to start introducing the Oak Harbor dredging alternative developments for the marina. Just a couple of things we're going on here. Right now we're in the process of just introducing the technical and permitting demands on this project. We want to discuss potential dredging alternatives. Dredging is a complex issue, and it takes a little education to get everybody up to speed. So that's what we're trying to do today. This is only beginning a discussion of the concepts, and further discussions and refinements will occur in the future. And I'd ask if you could kind of let me go to the end of the presentation until we do this. I'm going to hand this over to Paul when we talk about some of the financial issues. Like I said, our goal is to restore navigability where sedimentation has reduced depths. We do want to maintain it's a major asset for the city. Dredging is an ongoing activity. We've been doing it, for a while now, and it's generally on a cycle of 10 to 13 years. This is also part of the future efforts for reconfiguration of the marina. We do have a task underway for doing that. We are looking at that, but right now we're just kind of concentrating on the dredging part of it because we want to get that done to get the permit process going. We are focused on feasibility dredging within the existing marina. We're limited to that. As we move forward, we will do a more fuller study of the marina design, but the dredging is intended not to impact those activities. So any changes we want to do to the marina, the dredging will accommodate that. Let's talk about where we are. Right now, we're in the process of building a feasibility study. This is a tool for decision making. It's not a perfect refined design. It gives us a direction forward. It also gives the policymakers such as yourself a chance to make a decision and head us in the right direction. Once we're about 50% through the feasibility study, we'll get some public comment, begin refinement, eventually come up with the preferred alternative that can be adopted. Our next steps are further refinement, select an alternative, complete the feasibility report, then we go into preliminary design, permitting, sampling, detailed design, and ultimately construction. give you some background, like I say, our marina does get dredged on a periodic basis. Last time it was dredged, let's see if I use this. I'm going to be spotter intensive. Last time it was dredged was in 2010. These areas here that you can see the dots around, we only did the partial dredging in 2010. So we have a lot of areas that weren't dredged. And as I show you here, that's going to show up in these next set of studies. Talk a little bit about what's going on in Oak Harbor. We do have storms coming in from the south that pull the water in. So as the sediment-loaded water hits Windjammer Park, it reflects to both the west and to the east. Stuff going to the west, you can kind of see these wavy things here, kind of reflects out. So generally the sediment likes to follow this path around here. You can see where our marina is. This is actually a satellite photo. We're kind of a hole in the mud flat. So that's why we have to, if we didn't dredge, we'd be just like everything else. Now I'm going to talk about the bathymetry a little bit. Bathymetry is just measuring the bottom of a water body. And after our 2010 dredging, we did a 2011 dredge survey, which measured the depths. That was also for quantities. These blue areas are deeper areas that we got down to, and generally from about 12 to 14 feet. We do have some limitations on our by our lease, but you, oops, let's move back here one. But you can see these areas weren't dredged underneath these docks, which is our main work areas, and they're running from 7 to 8 feet. This was in 2011. So as we move forward with it, we did a survey last April, did measurements, and you can see that the blue has pretty much kind of disappeared, it's become green. The areas on the dock have come into the 6 to 7 foot range, but we have a lot more of it. So we've definitely seen some filling in the last 10 years. I'll go more into this here, but as we've projected it 10 years forward, if we don't dredge, it's going to be about 4 to 5 feet deep in here. So that's not going to support the boats that we actually currently service. Now I'll talk a little more about the science of it. We call it sedimentation rate. So we took the sedimentation from 2011 to 2023 and looked at where it's actually providing. So we're seeing a lot of sedimentation to the north, which kind of reflects that roundabout current we see up here. And we're seeing sedimentation, of course, underneath the dock. So the closer we get to shore and to the north, we see more of sedimentation. These blue areas are doing about a ½ an inch per year. These greener areas are anywhere to about 2 to 3 inches per year. And these red areas are 5 to 6 inches per year. So we're definitely experiencing sedimentation. Generally, we've seen 1 to 3 foot of fill in the last 12 years at the marina. So we definitely do have the sedimentation. And this is not actually unusual. It's actually, we're probably on the low side of sedimentation rates, but it does put forth the need that we do need to do this periodically. This is a model. We took the model and took all that fine detail and kind of smashed it out a little bit so it's just a little easier to see. Also, we do have to take into account is when we dig a hole, the nature abhors a hole, so it wants to fill it up. So we actually see an accelerated sedimentation rate first couple of years after we dredge. So this takes that into account. So again, looking back at our projected bathymetry, that's how we got to this slide here. Now we're going to talk about what's the impact of this sedimentation to our marina. So if we have what we call operational depth, and that's based on extreme low tide, how much water do we want to have underneath so the boats don't go aground. So it varies per dock. So excuse me, back here. A dock, we want about 7 feet in there, and we're currently running about 6.5, 7 feet. B dock, or C dock, excuse me, which is our dock where we have most of our bigger boats, we want 10 feet. And again, we're running about 6, 7 feet in there. F dock, we want 10 feet here, and we're just a little over that right now. But definitely, a lot of these docks, we're getting, having problems with operational depth, so, and it's going to get worse. And then if we project that on further, just to look at C dock, we want 10 feet there, but we're going to be in the 4 to 5, 6 range. So we'll have boats going aground at that point. So talk about how we cost estimate it. There's several factors in evaluating alternatives. One is cost, of course. Another issue that we're having to deal with is mitigation, which it adds a cost to the project, and I'll talk more about that, and the permitting. Does require a lot of permitting. So talk about our cost estimating assumptions. We put a lot of things into this. It's mobilization, demobilization, design permitting, administrative assistance, sales tax, of course, dredging and disposal of the material we take out, water quality monitoring, surveying, and also the mitigation. So we're going to have to mitigate, and right now we're looking at removing roof structures, removing piles. We have some barges out there we want to pull out, removing the sling launch, and we may end up, if we don't have enough mitigation credits, we have to actually purchase them elsewhere. Now, these costs we're presenting are order of magnitude costs. They're intended for alternative comparison. We don't try to say this is how much it's going to cost. We're trying to give it so we can compare the alternatives equally. As we go through design, refinement, all that type of thing, we come up with better costing, but there's a lot of assumptions that we're still building into it, and those assumptions get taken out in the design process. Another assumption we have is, the siltation since the last survey is not included in the dredge volumes of cost estimates. So if we're 2 to 3 years down the road, we're going to have more material just because of the sedimentation over the years. A big issue to us is open water dredge disposal. Right now, if our silt is of the proper quality, we can just take it out to an approved site and dump it in the sound or in the ocean. If it's got any kind of toxicity to it, then we have to go to an approved site, land site, which our cost goes way up. Right now, we're assuming we don't have to do that. We're doing moving creosote piles and demolition debris to our local landfill. We're assuming the 5 barges can be removed for mitigation. That'd be something we'll have to negotiate with the regulatory agencies. And again, this is just to get us started on our level estimating. When we get to as we get through the design, our estimates become a lot more refined and a lot closer. Right now, we're probably minus 30 plus 40% in the estimating range. Now, the mitigation is a big issue. I think I've talked to council before. Right now, the federal agencies, since 2019, are requiring offsetting mitigation for negative impacts of marine construction, for habitat destruction, turbidity, any impact to the natural environment. So we have mitigations applied through a spreadsheet. So when we do a certain activity, we get so many debits, then we have to offset those debits with credits, and there's ways of doing that. The credits we try to do is by removing, disposing of the existing debris, pollutants, like things like piles or the barges. Roofs are another one. Restoring habitat, if we do shoreline restoration, that helps out too. But if we don't get enough credits internally, then we have to buy the credits. These mitigations efforts are expensive, and I'll show that to you in a few minutes here. But they add cost to, add additional work to the work, they add additional planning and design costs, and there's potential for delays and making things move forward. Our approach is to maximize the mitigation credits in our own community. Why buy credits elsewhere when we could better invest them in our own shoreline or our own marina facilities? So that's what we're going to try to maximize as much as possible. Like I say, permitting is a huge issue. It's in water permitting. Matter of fact, I saw a newspaper article this morning. The Biden administration is pushing the salmon recovery parts in the Puget Sound, so that was not good news. So we're going to be seeing more of that in the future. We are under federal permits through the Corps of Engineers, which requires efficient wildlife consultation. That's where the mitigation issues come up with. We do need state permits from Fish and Wildlife and DNR. We're also subject to our marina lease conditions. We also need a whole bunch of local permits, that's SEPA, shoreline, building, fire, and others. Right now, we see this permitting take a minimum of 2 years. That's been sort of the way things are going these days. Like I said, the permitting world right now, especially in the mitigation credits, is highly dynamic. There's been a lot only since 2019, so there's a lot of work on that. So it does change pretty quickly. We are getting what's called a maintenance permit, which allows the city to perform additional dredging within a 10-year time period. So that allows us to dredge all we want in 10 years, which is good news. But like I say, we want to keep any mitigation credits within the city. And one note I wanted to add is maintenance dredging actually has a lower threshold, has a better mitigation credits than new construction. So by doing a maintenance one, we don't incur so much debits. But if we were doing new construction, that debit levels is much higher. So always keep that in mind if we're talking new projects. And right now, the city's you'll be hearing about an outfall here pretty soon that we're going to be dealing with the same situation on other projects within the city. So any in-water projects are going to be fighting this battle. I'm going to get down to our dredging alternatives. We've kind of done a range of alternatives to talk about what's going on, what we'd like to see. And our first alternative is dredge it all. Just dredge everything down to our maximum depth, get it as well as we can. This has a lot of, this is the cleanest solution, but it does have, of course, cost and other impacts to it. So dredging it all down to as deep as we can get it will result in us removing about 125,000 cubic yards of material. That's a lot of dump trucks. Now, talking about the cost of it, this is kind of hard to see, but we have three major cost categories here. One is just the actual construction. What does it cost to dig it out and haul it away? And that's both based on where we're out the open channels, it's a lot simpler. If we're doing work underneath the docks, it gets a lot more expensive. We also have survey, water quality modeling, and some miscellaneous things. So on this alternative, I'll go back into this. Then we have the actual mitigation costs, and we're looking at roof removal because that's a very high impact. So we do have covered moorage that's on its last leg. So we're just looking at removing that. We're also looking at pile removal, also removing the barges. We get credits for that. And we are looking at possibly removing ADOC. It's something for discussion. I'll talk a little bit about alternative 4. But anyway, the dredging of this hits us with about 850 debits. These mitigation efforts that we are discussing create 602 credits, so we're still short. So we're going to have to buy 256 credits with this option. And credits right now are running from $1,200 to $1,500 per credit. So that's a $320,000 hit. So this total, take all this into account with the engineering and administration, all that type of thing, is running about $11.5 million. In 10 years, this is what we look like with the sedimentation that we have. And, we're actually looking pretty good. We would be well within our operational depths. We have a couple areas that we might have to come back and do some dredging on, but then we'd still have the permits. So we would look at maybe doing another maintenance dredging in 10 years while the permit is still in effect, and just pick up the high spots. So like I say, I'm going to go through this slide quite often, but alternative 1 provides our most robust long-term outcome. Has very little impact on our operation, and will be fully navigable in 10 years. Now, alternative 2 is reducing the area quite a bit. So what we're going to do is not dredge these areas right here. This is the fairway, we call it, between E and F dock. So that reduces the amount of area, which is a big impact on our mitigation, and it reduces the amount of yardage. So we go from about 125 down to 100 cubic yards of material. And the mitigation is I'll say this, the mitigation is also driven by area. It's not dynamic. So if we go, it's all total area. So if we go down 10 feet or 12 feet, the mitigation credits are the same. So this reduces our area quite a bit. Going to that same logic, this one runs about $9.7 million. Mitigation credits dropped to like 650. I don't see that very well. And so we dropped our credits by almost 200. We still have to buy an additional 56, but we may be able to scrounge those elsewhere in the city. But it does create issues that we start to have operational depth problems here, and we're starting to get into the low end here, and this area starts to fill up. So we would have problems with that fairway during extreme low tides. So you'd be able to use the docks, but if it's an extreme low tide like we saw last July, the boats would have to wait till the tide comes back up. So again, alternative 2 gives us similar outcomes as alternative 1. It will work for us. We will have some issues between E and F dock. We may have some areas on the north side that would require to be dredged a lot more soon, and we'd probably have to dredge under some of the other docks a lot quicker. So alternative 3 is we said, okay, how can we optimize this to make it work now? And it's not looking at the long-term history of it, but just try to make it work for the next 10 years. And we reduce it down by about 88,000 yards of material, cubic yards of material. It is a decrease in it. We do have a reduction in cost down to about $8.8 million. So it does provide some cost benefit, but we start to see a lot more impact. We start to see these areas becoming a lot shallower, and they would require more extensive dredging in 10 years to make it happen. So this does give us a more lower cost alternative, but we buys us more problem in the future, so it's a trade-off there. So alternative 3, is pretty much the same as the 2. It's just we have more less operating depth, and it has a lot more impact on our facilities. Now we looked at alternative 4, and this is basically the same as alternative 3, but we said, okay, A dock has some economic issues for it. It's a small dock, small boats, and removing it would give us credits, and not dredging it would help us a little bit too. So that does reduce our dredging volume by down to about 84, so about 4,000 cubic yards, and it saves us a couple, about 8.4. Sorry, my eyes aren't that good. So it does save us a little money, and then we could apply the mitigation credits to this alternative. But looking at it, we said, well, the cost to remove the dock versus the cost of the credits is a bit of a wash. So that's one that if we wanted to pursue, it would be more on the economics of the marina versus the feasibility in this option. But it's also, we could do a alternative of that where we leave the dock, but we just don't dredge it. And you would have a lot shallower times a year, so it wouldn't be as usable, but it's something we would certainly talk about, but it's an option we have out to discuss. Again, alternative 4 does create a lot of problems for us. And like I say, we'll be back in a pretty extensive dredging cycle in 10 years. Now, we are looking at redevelopment, and we kind of looked at if we're moving forward with some redevelopment ideas, how would that impact dredging? And one area we're looking at is removing the slips on the west side of B on the east side of D dock and making them side tie-in so we can get bigger boats in there and tie in bigger boats. So if we moved ahead with that process, we would probably make those 2 slip areas a little deeper. They wouldn't be significant to the volumes we're talking about, but it's something we have in consideration. So that would, as we move forward, an alternative, if that one's starting to look more attractive to us, which it seems to be economically, we would probably look at that one and probably do a little deeper dredging there, but it's not included in these cost estimates now. To summarize, we are filling up with sand and dirt, and in 10 more years, our marina is going to start seeing significant operational impacts to it with the operation depths and the depths of the, especially in the summertime, because we have the low tides in the summertime when we're busiest. Looking at alternatives, we go from about 125,000 cubic yards to about 84. These cost numbers are not consistent with the cost numbers there. We're running about from $11.4 million down to about 8.4. And our percent operable is running from 100% to 65%. So those other two options, we'd start seeing a lot more impact during low water seasons. Now, Paul is going to discuss the financials a lot more. I'm just going to introduce it so I can hand it over to him. But, we see funding for the dredging but coming from a variety of sources. Payment vehicles include grants, cash reserves, revenue bonds, and marina revenues. We do have a bond that's coming up for retirement, which will free up some debt service, but I think this would probably help us a little bit with that, but Paul will go in more detail on that. We'll talk more about the debt, and I'll hand it over to Paul.
Thank you, Brett. So I wanted to just first start off with an overall comment, and that you've got a tough piece of property here to keep a marina in. You've got to do dredging now, you've got to do it 10 years from now, you need to replace the floating breakwater. None of those things are revenue producing. It's the slips that are going to produce you the revenue. And this is kind of a trend of from 2006 to 2022, what has happened with your without controlling for inflation. You can see that the moorage revenue basically has been replaced, the growth has been replaced by the dredging fee and by the environmental compliance fee. But if you do control for inflation, you basically have zero growth in your overall revenues. And this is a problem because your expenses are growing faster than CPI. They're growing at 4 to 5%. And so you're getting farther and farther in the hole. One of the things I wanted to point out is that the slips that are under 30 feet, that's A, B, and D docks, have been pretty flat. I mean, they declined in 2010 and they've grown a little bit, but not much. But they accounted for 41% of revenue in 2006, and now that's down to 27% in 2022. These are smaller boats, they're trailerable, they're not there all year round. In fact, they're there for 3 or 4 months. So trying to push more of the burden of rates on them, I'm afraid from a financial standpoint, isn't going to get you anything. All of the growth that you've experienced has been in the larger slips, C, E, F, G, and S. And you can see here, two things happened in this down period here. The recession of 2008 impacted the boating industry so that it was 2011 to 2012 before it started to grow again. It declined everywhere for that, new boat sales especially. Since then, you've had all of the growth in your revenue has been in those larger slips. That's where the money is, and that's what we recommend in the rate study that you consider. Now, we were asked, can you generate enough net revenue to cover the debt service for the current dredging project? From our rate system, we had estimated at the time we started $9 million. Looks like it's a little more than that. You have a county grant for $1 million, so it's around $8 million in 2023. We're projecting that by 2026, that'll be $9.3 million at 5%. We developed the pro forma, and coverage is thin from 27 to 31, but it can be covered by shortfalls. But under state, I want to just emphasize that this doesn't include replacement of the breakwater, the slips, the electrical, anything else that you've got there, and the dredging on a 10-year cycle, as Brett mentioned. When these projects occur, you're going to need to increase rates again. So just looking at this bond issue, the black line here, black column, is the net revenue with our proposed rate system coming in October 2023. Yellow shows the net revenue after debt service. You have an existing bond that will cease in 2025 that's a little less than 400,000, and the new bond will be 680,000. So for a few years, you won't be able to cover it, but you have some reserves here that you'll have from that net revenue, and then you'll be gaining reserves here. So the real question for you is that in 2036, if you do it in 2026, the dredging, and you have to do it again, you've got another bond issue that you'll need to do on top of that. We use the city of Des Moines as an example. I think I mentioned to you before. They prepared an assessment of their marina. Again, we worked with Moffitt Nickel on this as well, looking at rebuilding within 3 phases. And this compounding debt service could be a problem for you because of the things that we mentioned. The Des Moines plan initial increase in rates was to the average, not the median of the competitors. Now, Des Moines falls right next to the Seattle area, so they're in that higher valued market area where the rates are higher. You don't have that. And after the slips are improved at Des Moines, we're suggesting that they do a 90 percentile, so those rates will increase substantially. But this is the kind of debt service that they were looking at. They have existing debt here that in 2021 is done in 2023, then the first phase, and then a second phase, first phase, second phase, and third phase, so that they're looking at net the debt service of over $2.5 million a year. Now, it's a bigger marina, but you're going to be in some kind of a system like this where you're going to have compounding dredging for this event, for the next dredging event, and then for all of the replacement that you need to do. And so from the perspective of looking at the rates, you're way too low right now. Going to the median of where Puget Sound is right now is a very generous offer from the city in terms of where you ought to be. And you're going to have to be a lot higher than that in order to pay the debt service that you'll need in coming years. So that's my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Sorensen. At this time, I will turn to council. Councilor Hoffmeyer, do you have your hand up? Okay, go ahead.
I haven't seen anybody smile in 34 minutes. Certainly not all sunshine and rainbows. You know, I'll admit that this part of this puzzle alone is not very exciting in itself. You know, a $12 million Band-Aid, you know, to get us by until 2037, when we know that we have an aging infrastructure that might struggle to make it to that point, and a channel that will also need dredged. You know, hopefully when all of those pieces come together with a redevelopment plan, et cetera, hopefully it makes sense. But at this point, I guess there hasn't been too many reasons to smile over the last 34 minutes. My biggest question is, and you know, I think we've probably answered this, but my biggest question is, have things been let go too long down there? Have we passed a point of no return yet?
I would say no. I think the 2000, if we'd had a 2010 dredging like we should have done, I would say that one bought us in trouble. So we're in a much, like I say, the main revenue docks are B, C, and D. So if we had to do less dredging there, we would probably save more money. So I think we could. Right now, we're catching up in this dredging cycle with what happened then, what should have happened then now, plus what we have now. So In terms of the condition assessment, we looked at the condition assessment with it, and yeah, it's any type of facility like that takes maintenance. Anything in the water takes maintenance. So, but we need to plan for that and deal with it in its life cycle. But the fact is, it's a good facility. Chris.
I think that Brett's correct. On September 9th, just a few weeks ago, we celebrated the 49th anniversary of the Marina. So we're closing in on 50 years. And over those past 49 years, it's served us well, and we've had great crews there that have kept things going despite all of the difficult conditions there. As we move forward and look at the Marina, we know that there are things that are broken and there are things that are not going to last much longer. But we also know that we have a good infrastructure, we have a good footprint. We just need to redesign the slips to generate more revenue. So if the question is, will it last until 2037 under its current condition, I would say that it would. But it would be awful difficult to keep it in the shape that it's in now. It would take a lot more money in repairs and maintenance versus where we're at now, where we can continue on and keep fixing things. Things are going to start to break in just almost catastrophic ways at some point, but I don't think we're quite there yet. There are things that are going on, but they're not catastrophic. So.
Thank you very much. And I think started to be some good news in there by the end, and it is it's a gorgeous facility. I mean, I was down there for the Hydros for Heroes, for instance, and I know we've got some council members that are down there a lot. I truly hope we can make this work, but thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Councilor Hoffmeyer. Councilor Munns, did you have your hand up? Oh, okay. Okay, Councilor Stuckey, go ahead.
Well, I've certainly been dredging going over those numbers. How to get one in, how to get one. All right. In the alternative for the omit ADOC, is it possible to kind of just write off ADOC in our minds and expand off FDOC? So you're looking at, I'm looking at alternative 4 where it's talking about omitting ADOC. Eventually, it's being it's so close to shore, eventually it would be unusable. Sure. Can you expand more slips off of FDOC and kind of just write ADOC off?
No, you can't expand out on FDOC for a couple of reasons. One, that would be a new permit, which would be difficult to get. We did at one time have a plan to drop a dock in between F and E dock, kind of where the G is there, heading in a southerly direction, but we decided not to do that because that would cut it down. Something like that may be able to be done, but not expanding FDOC, especially since that's our breakwater, and we're looking at replacing that as well in the near future.
And then during the dredging process, is there a substantial loss in revenue on those slips? I mean, is everything going to be able to be full capacity as dredging, or is there going to be a time where there's a loss in revenue from those slips during a dredging process?
There certainly will be a lot of boats moving around. We can't have boats where they're dredging, that's obvious. So what we did in the last one is we just juggled boats around, rafted boats up, put them here and there, did the best we could to keep them in the marina, to keep that revenue there. It's likely we'll try the same thing again at this juncture, but there's no guarantee we can do that, and there's no guarantee that people actually want to be rafted up or want to be in a marina that's a little, the water's a little murky and stuff like that. So it is conceivable that we could lose a little revenue, but I don't think that would be a huge amount. There wouldn't be a mass exodus of the marina during the dredging. It would just be a reshuffling around.
Do we have some data from the last time it was dredged on how many people decide, it's just not worth it?
I don't have hard data, but I do remember moving a lot of boats around. The staff was actually moving a lot of boats around to stay ahead of the dredging. There were some that left, and it's kind of convoluted in the sense that that's when that first dredging fee hit, and that wasn't a real popular thing around the tenants for a lot of different reasons. This is a different set of tenants. This is a different mindset. So, again, I think that some boats may leave. They would still have their slip and they could return, but they may be gone for that 3 months or so of the dredging process.
Okay, obviously you want to do it and you want to do it right, so there's an appeal to alternative 1.
Right.
I also do kind of like an appeal. There's a little bit of appeal to the cost savings of the omit ADOC if we could have additional slips off of G, But I do understand looking at the map and the depth, I mean, that could be an issue eventually too, so.
That's right. As we work through this, the thing that we have to really consider is yes, we're dredging for now and we're dredging for Oak Harbor in 2025, 26, whenever we start digging. But we're also dredging for the future because the permit goes on for 10 years, so it's very likely that at the 9-year mark we would do another dredging. But at that point, the costs are going to be way more compared to now, obviously. So is it better to take a bigger scoop now or a bigger scoop later is the question. And then the finances come into play. How are we going to pay for this? Which one's more palatable for the budget, that sort of thing.
That is always the question. Do you hold off? I mean, you look at, for example, the fire station and things like that. So I appreciate the presentation and the comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Stuckey. Councilor Munns.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Where is Dock S? He
Dock
mentioned
S
it-
is down by the fuel dock. That's
okay,
the
where
one.
the big boats are.
Yeah.
That practically abut to the A dock
Yes.
that is silting in faster.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
The last time we dredged, we got started, had all the permits, and the Corps came in and said, oh, wait a minute, you need one more permit, and made us stop. And then they didn't give us the 2 weeks on because there was some fish that they thought would be coming back. So if we dredge, make darn sure, you know when those fish are gonna come or whatever, because I'm sorry, we lost 2 weeks that we could have gotten a lot more done. Our boat just happens to be there, drives 7 feet, and we sit in the mud a lot at just under 0. So it happens now. So I just want to be sure that the timing, you've really checked into it so that when we start, we get done what we want. Otherwise, it was kind of a waste, not completely of money, but anyway. If we're dredging, why aren't we doing some of the reconfiguration at the same time? And if the boats are being moved, why can't you move the dock so you can scoop evenly across instead of, oh, you got a clamshell in here and there's a pier and then you got a so you're missing pieces and it's not evenly picked up.
Well, we're moving ahead with the dredging because the permitting takes 2 years. We need to get the
Right.
permits. The reconfiguration of the dock would not necessarily change our permits, especially if we're on our existing footprint. So the time critical action is getting the permit started. I said it's 2 years, and you discussed we need to get those right. So we have more time to work through the reconfiguration because it doesn't really impact our permitting cycle. We need to get the permit started as soon as possible because we're still 2 years out. And Paul said, we're gonna have 2 more years of 2 more years of infill, another 6 inches in there someplace. That gets us, so moving with the dredging gets us started. The reconfiguration, we have more time to be, I'd say, more deliberate about.
Except when you're looking at side tide for B dock, and they're gonna be bigger boats than ours, 42, and if that isn't dredged enough, because you're dredging it this direction, but you're moving them this direction, so they won't be at the same. So when you remove that, you've got silt piled up there where they couldn't reach before. So I'm trying to figure out what do you need to do when to be able to come out the best.
Within the permitting world, if we go deeper, it doesn't impact this. They care about the area. They don't care about the depth. So if we say we want to go 2 feet deeper, in the permitting world, that's not an impact. We can change that number or just come in with a deeper number, and we always can back it off a lot easier. But as soon as we start adding, they want to come back and redo the permit. So that's why we're considering it. As we look through these options, we may ask for a little bit more in the permitting world that we actually, more than what we intend to do, because it doesn't cost us any more in obtaining the permit, but it gives us time to make our final financial decisions. But we don't want to get down and all of a sudden realize, we got our permit, but it doesn't match what we want to build too much. We always can back it off less. We can't add to the permit. So yeah,
Okay, well,
that's why we put it up there is, you know, if we want to do the side tie, there's a couple considerations there that we would probably put them into it. And
So what I don't understand is, here's the dock.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, here's one slip, here's the finger in between, here's the other one, and when they dredge, they can only dredge where it's open. If you remove these and now you're doing side tie, what happens to
we're
the
actually intending to dredge underneath the dock.
Okay,
If you look at the cost estimates, so that's what happened last time. We didn't dredge underneath the dock, so there is two costs in the cost. We have a dredge about $50 a cubic yard for dredging underneath the moorage, and the out in open fairways is about $36 a cubic yard. So we are intending to actually dredge underneath the where the
okay,
slip.
we'll get it all.
We'll get it all, yes.
All right, when was the permit changed on the maintenance of dredging so that now, as long as you start it again within the 10 years, just before the deadline, you don't have to re-permit? All
I
your
know,
permits
I think that's just been
lapse.
more recently.
Yeah,
'Cause,
maybe Bill can address that.
Bill Gherkin's
Okay,
on.
that's all right, that's
Yeah.
all right. I mean, but it's just,
It's
it's a
recent.
recent
It's
thing.
recent, yeah.
Okay.
They've had them for 5 years in the past, like our down where the lagoon is, we've had a 5-year maintenance permit, so I think they've just increased it to 10 years.
So,
Yeah, and Amber's actually the expert, but yeah, you go after a 10-year maintenance dredging permit, and particularly with the sediment sampling, you guys have been clean, and we're gonna look at trying to get a down ranking. If you guys have previously been contaminated, it'd be a different story. But we're looking at a 10-year maintenance dredging permit, which basically allows you a volume of material within 10 years to be dredged within this footprint to these maximum depths.
okay, thank you, I know I have more questions.
We're available to call if you have questions.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? No worries. Any other questions? Counselor Wittgenstein.
You guys, thanks again for the presentation and walking us through it. Is there any way to, as we go through this process of dredging, and you're mentioning that the restructure will happen essentially simultaneously or during or in and around, with that restructure, what kind of thoughts are we having with the breakwater? Is there a way to create the breakwater in a way to reduce this dredging every 10, 13 years? To extend that time frame?
There are breakwater models out there, steel walls, things like that, that can be put into place that act as a breakwater and stop the sediment from entering the marina from that angle. If you look at the map that Brett showed up there, a lot of the sediment comes from the north. It truly comes from the west too, but the map with the arrows on it, there we go, that one there, you can see that it comes down and hits Windjammer and then goes a little left and a lot right, and then it hits over by the yacht club and bounces back into the marina. So truly the only way to stop that sediment would be to stop that flow of sediment and current heading that way. I remember that when they actually did the bathymetry survey, I was talking to Bill about that, and one of the big concerns you have to keep in mind is circulation of the water and creating stagnant water, and that was a discussion we had. Our best case scenario is to stay on top of the dredging. We learned from Moffett Nickel that our sediment is not abnormal, that we're actually below the curve in sediment. So we're sitting in a pretty good place. What's really hurting us now is the 2010 dredge was not executed properly and in a way that it cleaned out the whole marina. That's why as we look at these alternatives, 1 and 2 is the best option for the future, one being the best. But to completely stop the sediment, that would be extremely, extremely difficult.
And also might create problems elsewhere, because
Yeah.
stop it, it'll deflect out. So
It'll push it
our
out.
biggest worry is we don't want to start filling in the main channel because we don't get to dredge there without a
Right,
lot of
right.
problems.
The sediment's going to come,
Right.
and it's going to pile up somewhere, be it in the marina or against a steel wall or something like that.
So the mud flat that we see along the bank is actually a good thing for us because that's where it settles out. It doesn't go up and down.
So what we'll probably deal with in the long term, when we deal with the channel dredging, this is something we have to deal with and not part of this cost, and hopefully we get federally recognized. And so that's the whole impetus of starting to trying to work with the U.S. Army Corps and look long term. And so I know from the two council members on the dais there, one of the people that we talked to in the Army Corps said, well, why don't you kind of work on long-term plans there? Because we have the breakwater and the sedimentation issue going on that can be done in different ways. And historically, there used to be a crooked spit that goes out, and then there was Mailer's Wharf that kind of goes out. There was sediment in some of the things I read there, but it kind of, but there was no marina where it is now, but it kind of had that blockage go, so it kind of set in that whole circle there and spun around there, which was a smaller area, and then left the bay area that we're in open. So we'll certainly look at the long term there, but like they kind of said, that's going to be more of a discussion, not on this area, but more on the channel dredging area when we look at that.
And so my other question, it kind of goes towards the funding. Is there anything else we can do, through taxes or through bonds to help mitigate these costs, to extend it so that in the future we're not looking deep into our pockets or our reserves, where we can actually maybe get, and not just, obviously we have to raise rates, I think, at some level too, but other ways that we can do this that might incorporate some of the shoreline restoration and stuff as well?
Well, there are some grants, and the city's searching for those right now. What we found with those is they're typically related to job creation. So if you had fishing boats come in, then you can show that number of employees, you get money from the Economic Development Administration. Other agencies have different requirements, but I know you're looking at that. In our experience, there hasn't been that much funding from grants for recreational boating. And so what we see other marinas doing are looking at upland development or cross-subsidization of the marina by some of their other facilities. For example, a port that has a marine terminal and some upland lease property that they're making net revenue off of. They may choose to divert some of that to the marina for these expenses. However, they have to be careful about that because all of those other things cost money as well. So it's similar to the situation you're in here. Rates are the best for doing that.
So to follow up on that, you mentioned commercial use, right? Is our marina at any level equipped or potentially could be equipped to help support some of that and be dual?
It is. It is in the sense of crabbing and shrimping. We have those two industries that go on right now. A better way to look at it is, what would the commercial interest be? What would a commercial person come to the marina for? Like I said, we have the crabbing season that's going to be starting up roughly October 15th and running off and on till the end of the year. Then we have a big shrimping season after that. At one time, we had Deception Pass tours down here giving tours of whales out of here. If we look at our marina and where it's located, there's been talk of ferries to Camano Island and even to Coopville and tourist boats. And people have tried the tourist boat thing, and it just hasn't panned out. So if you look at, like, say, for example, on the coast, those marinas there's a huge fishing industry because there's fish there. In our area, there's not enough fish and crab and shrimp to generate a whole year-round fleet to be here, coupled with the seasons. So what we have to look at is being creative in creating a commercial industry in making Oak Harbor a tourist destination where you can get on a boat and go for a boat ride to Coupeville or out and see the whales or something like that. There just wasn't enough people to support those efforts previously.
Thank you. That's all I got.
Thank you. Julie, has Councillor Wiesner joined us? Okay. Okay. I'll have a couple comments before we start round 2 of questions. First, would it be possible for us to get, for you to email us the slide that has the small slips and large slips breakdown? And the financials? Yeah, the presentation we have in our packet is not as comprehensive as the one we're looking at.
Yeah, we can do that, definitely.
Thank you so much. I'm wondering if we can kind of do where I'm leaning towards is a hybrid between option 1 and option 4, where we still dredge the fairway between E and F dock, but we also eliminate A dock from the project. It take 10 years. It's still sort of navigable for really small boats. We wouldn't necessarily have to remove the dock. We could use that space and offer people a place to store their kayaks and their stand-up paddle boards and all that, get some revenue from that. We could move like maybe the youth sailing over there, and then that would free up a spot for a larger boat on the corner of E and G dock. That's kind of where I'm, and I'm going to throw in, again, my pitch for the floating tiny homes there on A dock when it gets unusable for boats. But I would be interested to see a cost breakdown of that scenario.
Yeah, that would, if we wanted to move in that direction, that was sort of, I talked about refinement.
Yeah.
We wanted to and that is actually something we've been thinking about is, if you take that option 4 and apply it to any of the options, it's something we would, but we wanted to make sure that people were okay with us going ahead with that direction of A dock, maybe not the same thing, as long as we feel that that's going to be supported. I think that's why we put it out there, we can put it in the mix, and it fits into a lot of alternatives.
Yeah, it just seems that A dock is always going to be our trouble spot when it comes to, filling in and dredging. I certainly would, it makes sense to do the whole enchilada and do it right so it'll last the longest amount of time, but the issue there is the price tag, and so it is, it's tough. But I appreciate the level of detail that you've gone into in presenting all of the different options so that we have something to compare each one to. This is great, thank you. Any other council comment? Councillor Muntz.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Chris, on B dock, what is the largest? Most of it is sailboats. They're not all little fishing, crabbing boats. They're sailboats that draft. If we don't, nothing, then they stick in the mud all the time?
Are you referring to A dock, if we leave A dock untouched? Yes, eventually that's what would happen. Most of those boats draw 3 or 4 feet. We're talking about San Juan 24s and stuff like that don't draw a lot. So during the low tides, and it'll only get progressively worse over time, they'll start to hit the bottom and then ultimately go all the way down into the bottom.
Okay, and the other thing is when you're talking, we have to mitigate. We've mitigated before. We've planted the right kind of plants, and all it takes is one extreme high tide and all the driftwood or a storm, and it knocks it all out, and it has to all be redone, all that money. So some of the mitigation we've done, maybe we should have done it in another area. I mean, when we were looking at the county, really wanted us to do this grant, and we would have gotten a new lift. But they wanted to take away a third of Catalina Park and bring in sand and all of these nice plants. And before we even voted on this, we had that extreme storm where the driftwater is up touching the gazebo, and that's not even missing a third of the park with this new plan. And the slip clients would have had to pay to redo all of that, and that's not fair. And so when we look at mitigation, I hope we are very careful and wise that we're not doing something because this environmental group over here wants us to do it because it looks pretty, but we know how the storms and the extreme highs and lows go that just wipe it off in a nanosecond overnight. And so that bothers me. I believe in mitigation, we need to do that, but sometimes maybe we can do another choice or something on that.
Most of our mitigation we're looking at right now is removal of roofs and piles and stuff that are to a net benefit to us. We're not, right now, not looking at shoreline restoration per se. We may look at it in other projects, but this project doesn't include shoreline restoration. But of course, that's, we want this to be most functional for us, and, that's why we've kind of shied away from shoreline restoration. Pulling piles is a lot of bang for your buck. Pulling those sucking hulks out of there, we got to do it anyway, so we might as well get credit for it. So, again, we're trying to maximize our mitigation dollars where it makes benefit to the city and benefits the marina.
You still have a place for the seals to lay, the baby seals and stuff, because that's a real tourist goer. I mean, you've got the nursery over here and you've got the seals over here, and they're on terrible wood and creosote and all of that, but that's a high point for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's pretty neat.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Munns. Any further feedback, questions, concerns from council? Go ahead, Councilor Wittgenstein.
If we weren't to dredge in the next 3 years and we put this off and we kick this can down the road, which typically happens in places, what's the impact to the marina in 10, 15 years if we were to do that?
If you look at my slide,
And you might use the mic too, it would be helpful.
yeah, sorry. We're kind of sharing the podium here, yeah. Yeah, that one right there. So if you start looking at it, we're getting like on C-Dock where we need 10 feet. We're going to be in the range of 6 to 7 feet of drafting depth. So we're going to start having boats go aground on the best dock we have. So again, that's what we've projected. E and D dock are still, just because the operating depth is left, they're still in the same range. So yeah, like I say, our functionality of this marina in 10 years, if we don't dredge it, is going to decrease, and we're not going to be able to handle any larger boats. Then our cost factors, we can't attract the boats because they're going to ground, so we don't generate the revenue.
Thank you.
Just one more
Yeah,
thing
go ahead.
from my perspective is that I kind of look at this as a rate increase linked to a dredging project, and then looking down the road at what you might put there. And I do a lot of rate studies. You didn't raise rates in 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, I believe 2020, and 2023 so far. You're way behind. You're way behind where you should be. Even if you went to half of where the median is, that's about where you ought to be right now. So when I hear that you can't do that, and you look at what it's going to cost to do these things, it's just like passing ships in the night. And that may be necessary, but not sufficient. The rates have to come up, and then you have to figure out, is there more grant money available? How do you do it? How much is the city's responsibility? How much is the tenant's responsibility? All of those things come to the foreplay.
Well, I think that segues us perfectly into the next, the next item, which is the Marina rates presentation. Do you feel like you've gotten adequate feedback from us on the dredging portion before we move on?
I do. I think we had a very good discussion, and mainly we just wanted to bring you up to date, but I think your feedback is super valuable, and you can bet that I'll be watching this again just to note down the super important parts. But
Okay, good. Want to
yeah,
make sure this
thank
was a
you.
productive use of your time.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so moving on, Marina rates presentation. Harbor
All
Master
right.
Chris Sublett.
So I hope to put a smile on somebody's face. That's really what I try to do at the marina. I'm not sure we're going to do it with this conversation, though. This is really a continuation of the conversations we had in June and August. At the August 27th workshop, we discussed these rates in a pretty detailed fashion. And staff was asked to get together again with the Marine Advisory Committee, and we have a couple of members here, J.J. Jones and Byron Scooby, and talk about, maybe a compromise or, what else could be done, and we did that. So as we go through this presentation, I'm going to explain the rate options to you again, and we have a new one that we'll introduce. But really the goal is to get a better understanding of what you would like us to bring back on October 17th. We don't necessarily want to bring back all three rate options and then have to make a huge decision at that point, and that's why we're here today talking about it, is to get a head nod or something with, bring this one back. This one looks like a great one. So we really have a three-pointed presentation today. I'm going to go through the general slide presentation and talk about the rate options. Paul is going to make some comments on the rates, similar to what he just did. And Brian Smith, our Parks and Recreation Director, has just got some closing comments on this as well. But Paul has an appointment, so I'd like to kind of reverse the order a little bit and have Paul come up before I go deep into the race, just to give his comments from what he's seen at our marina and what he's seen at other marinas in the shape we're in. And as you'll see, the lines have been blurred between the dredging and the rate conversation. So, and then I'll come back and do the general presentation.
Thank you, Chris. Well, it's really nothing new. As I mentioned, I started my firm in 1986 after about 10 years working for engineering firms, doing a lot of these kinds of studies in Alaska and the West Coast and elsewhere. And it's the same situation now. We've got nearly all the marinas in Puget Sound and Washington State are 50 plus years old. They've had a long, hard life. All of the construction costs have increased significantly. All of the permitting requirements have increased significantly. And I come to organizations like yours and I say, you've got to raise rates, and you don't want to have the tenants feel bad about that. The bottom line is, this is an existential threat. If you don't raise the rates, you're not going to have a marina. We did this 10 years ago with you and nothing happened with that. Rates didn't increase at all. So I really think this is a dire situation. And I would add to it that even doing the modest rate increases that we've proposed are necessary but not sufficient. As you see, if you have 10 years out another dredging episode, or if you start replacing things, you're going to need more money. And so I guess the question is that paid for by the users, or is that paid for by the city? I don't know what your situation is with respect to that, but even some of the strongest ports that we work with think that that should be paid for. The revenue producing components of that should be paid for by the tenants. So that's where I would leave it with you in terms of what the decisions are. And if you punt this down the road and reduce the rates, our suggestions are very, very modest. They're nowhere near where you need to be in terms of being able to pay for this whole 9 yards. It just gets you through the dredging. And with that, I'm sorry, but I need to get on up to Anacortes. So, thank you for coming. All right.
All right, thank you for your perspective.
Okay, so on with the presentation, and then Brian will follow up after me as well. So just some historical information. Back in 2019, and a lot of this you've seen already, I'm just going to recap it real quick. A resolution was passed to increase rates by 3% April 1st of 2019, 2021, and 22. We did all those increases as planned, with the exception of 2020. Due to COVID, we decided to suspend that increase, and that was good. We also had BST, Paul, complete a rate study for us, and that compared our rates to other marinas in the Puget Sound. And that really was a best practice, but also provided some general guidance as to which direction we should go with our rates and where we should be. It revealed to us that the Oak Harbor Marina rates are extremely low, and you can see the figures there. But the most important thing that it revealed to us was that our rates are not sustainable. It hinders our operational avenues and abilities, and eventually it won't keep up with those operational costs. And then the biggest discrepancy we found was in the larger open moorage categories. We have vetted this topic 5 times with the Marine Advisory Committee meeting, and I thank them for their patience and their efforts. Most recently, on September 11th, we met, and we again discussed the BST and Associates proposal as well as the proposal from Mr. Bradley. We did not discuss the compromise. There wasn't any direction for that. A motion was once again made to accept and recommend Mr. Bradley's rates, and that motion passed unanimously. So we weren't able to come to a compromise or a shift or anything like that. As we move forward, and this is kind of hard to see on the big screen, there are some rate increase options. We have the BST one, and that's the one that staff really prefers. We believe that is best for the marina. Then we have the Bradley rate proposal, which the MAC recommends. And then we came up with a compromise, and that's in between the Bradley and the BST proposals, and that's the one we're recommending. And we're only recommending that out of an essence of time. Each month that we put this off, we lose money. We've estimated that through this process, we've lost somewhere in the neighborhood of $80,000. Here's a chart that shows the pros and cons and explains each one. Starting at the top, the BST and Associates rates. That's the one we prefer. And that moves all of the rates up to the 2023 median rates in 2025. And again, the median rate, you have the 90 percentile, then you have the average. The median rate is the lowest of those. It throws out the highest and the lowest, and it gives you that median rate. So we're not even trying to get to the average, and we're not trying to get to the 2023 median today. We're 3 years out, and you have to consider that in these times between now and 2025, that other marinas are going to raise their rates. So again, we're going to be behind the curve and not where we should be. This proposal also focuses on the larger boats, paying more of the share and more of a fair share than the smaller boats. The compromise option is the one that we're recommending today, and it provides a compromise between the BST and Bradley rate proposals. It doesn't maximize revenue, but it generates a little bit more, and it shifts some of the increase from the smaller boats back up to the larger boats. So it's in the middle, and it's right between both proposals. Mr. Bradley's proposal, and he spent a lot of time on this, and we appreciate that as well, that spreads the increase out more to the smaller boats. So for example, under the BST proposal, the 40-foot boats were going to be increased by about 14%. The Bradley proposal shifts some of that increase down to the smaller boats in the 24, 28-foot category, which is an extremely volatile category because they're towable, they can leave the marina, that sort of thing. We also offer the small boat contract, which will be increasing as well. So a lot of the 24-foot category, in fact, I would venture to say 95% of it, where we would expect to see some of these increased costs, really only affects it for about 3 months out of the year. This is the one that the Marine Advisory Committee recommended. It doesn't bring us up to the median price point at all, so we're going to be talking about this again. And it's similar to dredging. The question is, do we dredge the whole thing now and have a lighter dredge later, or do we dredge part of it now and have a deeper dredge later? We can look at the rates the same way. Do we raise them up higher now for a lighter rate increase in the future, or do we not bring them up and have a higher rate increase in the future? So it's kind of a very similar scenario. So those are really the three proposals that we have on the table. Again, no decision today. We're just kind of looking for some direction, a head nod. Moving forward, we do recommend the compromise, but again, it should be clear that we prefer the BST one and the MAC prefers the Bradley one. So at this point, I'm going to ask Mr. Smith, our Parks and Recreation Director, to come up here, and then we'll go into some questions if you want.
I just want to start out with, I know these are heavy discussions, especially when we're talking about dredging in large numbers. I would just say, don't be discouraged. These are all very doable things. We're already a third of the way there. Chris has done an excellent job with managing reserves in the face of rising maintenance costs. We have $1 million support from the county. We could probably redirect another 600,000 possibly towards that. We have a great, perfect alignment of the end of our current bond with the start of this project. So these are things that are absolutely doable. It's not all doom and gloom. It's just very serious decisions we have to make on how we want to proceed. But proceed we will. And I just want to give a few comments. As a director accountable for the success of the marina, just want to frame this discussion a little bit with some of my thoughts on things you've heard today. So to start out with, you hire professionals who are educated staff with experience in managing these facilities. We've worked with BST and Associates as professional consultants and experts in the field to conduct this market study and give you recommendations on where we should be priced. That's a lot of time. It's a lot of effort and money going into helping you make an informed and prudent decision for the viability of our city's marina. You have appointed a Marina Advisory Committee to help you as a resource in understanding these issues as well. And for the most part, they have an honest desire and a lot of interest in making recommendations to you in the best interest of the marina's operations. So when we brought this item to you last time, backed by the data we researched, what I heard from council was that you understood the data and the recommendations. You were in approval of those, but a couple of you wanted to see the MAC in support of those recommendations or an acceptable compromise that tweaked the staff's recommendations in a way that they would vote a motion in approval of. Unfortunately, with any kind of political body, sometimes you can have someone disinclined that kind of throw off the direction and coming to the table and finding a solution there. Like Chris mentioned, we weren't able to find a compromise that MAC was willing to accept, so staff had to develop one independently. Chris has put that together in response to council's direction at the last meeting. But if the city's marina is to continue to be managed as a fiscally autonomous enterprise fund without financial support from the general fund for its operations, you need to allow us to be competitive in the market and respond to the increased costs of doing business and develop the resources needed to make essential improvements to a 50-year-old facility to remain sustainable both now and into the future. And I get it, no one likes price increase. We're looking at those with leagues right now. I don't like having to pay significantly more now for needed repairs and operational supplies than we did 5 years ago. But that's the market system we live in, and we either address it and purposely plan and implement the regeneration of our facilities and our city as a place we want to live in and visitors to frequent, or we take the deferred maintenance, value engineered, sort of half effort that continues sort of a slow decline there. That puts a burden onto future generations. I've heard some talking points about the pain of raising fees and having to adjust because we've put this can so far down the road to have to make these adjustments that, there's fear that people might leave if we do that. Well, there's no availability anywhere else. Even with BST's recommended market adjustment, we're still one of the cheapest options in the region. If you go somewhere else, you'll be paying more. The majority of our users are locals who want the convenience of having their vessels here. And the only demographic who even has an option are smaller boats who can trailer out. The max recommendation on the increases puts a greater increase on those small boats who have the option to go out, more than BST's rates that staff presented. So really, in the end, the issue is not what amount we charge for our fees. It's really a perception of the value the community sees and places on what they're receiving for those fees. So we can't continue to Band-Aid a 50-year-old marina with price compression that we're experiencing that all other marinas in the area are adapting and adjusting to. We need to move beyond just addressing the deferred maintenance and start implementing an improvement plan that will make the marina sustainable and elevate us to a destination facility, which is what we really should be. Regardless of what direction council goes, Chris and I are going to transform this marina into the crown jewel of the city. We would just really appreciate your help in making that job a little bit easier. Now, this is a work session item, so this is a discussion point, but like Chris said, we would like some sort of indication on what you'd like to see in an agenda for a motion coming up. Just, again, as Chris mentioned, keep in mind we are getting very late in implementation. We're already a year behind. We're going to miss the master fee schedule, so we'll have to bring that the adoption back. And we're a year behind in revenues, which equates to about a full-time staff member. So we really want to get moving forward in implementing something that's going to allow Chris and his staff to continue to be viable. I'll turn over to any discussion or questions you have. We have MAC members here that I'm sure would be happy to have a discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. This time I will turn to council for feedback and questions. Councilor Munns, go ahead.
If the council would allow for the two MAC members, if they're willing to give some comments over what you've heard, I would appreciate it. And the reason is as a council member, we depend on our committees who are appointed that give their time to do this, and when they give a recommendation to kind of slap them in the face and say, we don't like it, I'd like to hear why they're sticking to the plan that they have. I have an idea why, but I just would like to hear, because Dr. Scooby, how long have you had a boat in that marina?
45 years.
45 years. Okay, so he's seen everything come and go. And Mr. Jones?
23 years.
23 years, and we're probably pretty close to that. Same thing. So if you wouldn't mind, sir, both of you, thank you.
Is that okay?
Yeah,
Is it
the
okay? I'm
council?
sorry. Is it okay?
Okay.
All right. Thank you, council.
I'm Byron Scooby, and I think we're making, to me, we've made way too much of a deal about this, the different plans and so forth. My understanding was that the total revenues were virtually identical between the two plans, were they not? Assuming we didn't change our makeup of number of boats.
So that's a great question, and on the surface, yes, that's it. But I think if we look at how transient the small boats are and where our vacancies are, that changes the overall revenue. The revenue I put in the packet was based on 100% full marina year-round, and we're not there.
Yeah, we aren't there, but I guess the only difference between the two plans, and I think we're making way too big a deal of it, is just that we, in one of the plans, we spread it out more evenly among the various sizes of boats, and the other plans, we kind of stuck it more to the larger boats, which may make sense if the smaller boats are going to leave. I just, to me, the real crux of the matter is there's an urgency about this, and we need to make a plan and every month that we delay this rate increase is costing us about $11,000 each month. So I'd like to see this implemented one way or the other quickly.
Thank you, Dr. Scooby.
Yeah, hi,
J.J. Jones, go ahead.
Good afternoon. Oh, I'm sorry. Hi, J.J. Jones here. I've been in the Marina 23 years, in Oak Harbor for 43 years. I think it's interesting. The Marina Advisory Committee did not see this compromise plan. I know it was in which packet? Okay. Do you remember? No. I don't think we saw the compromise plan. We did, as a Marina Advisory Committee, unanimously approve the Bradley plan, which had the rate increase spread out evenly over all categories of boats. We think that was probably the most equitable way to do that. We also noticed that if you saw in Paul's presentation earlier, that the Marina revenue is only 27%. The small boats only account for 27% of the Marina revenue. And, you know, I've said this many times to, I think, all of you, is that the biggest thing that we can do to increase revenue out of the Marina is reconfigure the Marina. And that there's no doubt in my mind that if we reconfigure the Marina, both on B and D docks, and make it suitable for 40-foot plus boats to be in there, we'll generate a lot more revenue than right now, if you walk on B dock, there's a half a dozen boats undercover on B dock right now. The rest of them are gone. They're either up against the fence line or they've been pulled out, and Chris won't see them again until next year. So I was a big advocate of the Bradley plan. I think it's equitable. I think we all agree as a Marina Advisory Committee that we do need to raise the rates. We know that it's going to be painful. We will lose revenue. Boats will leave the Marina, and the argument that there's nowhere for them to go is fair. But you know, if you push hard enough, you can get a slip in certain places. So, and people will just, you know, if they can take their boats home, they'll take their boats home. So I agree with Dr. Scooby and the fact that we really need to agree upon this and get it going, because it's going to take, we're going to have to tell a story to the people in the Marina why. I mean, I don't think, Paul indicated that the Marina rate increase was modest. I don't think 37 to 43% over 3 years is a modest increase. That's a lot of money. That's a huge increase. So people are going to be upset about this. And I remember I know Chris went back to the 3% raises, but I've been here long enough to remember when Mac was the harbor master and there was a 15% over 3-year rate increase. They instituted the first 5% and then waived the last two 5% because so many people had left the Marina. And that was a different time. There were places in Shoreline, there were places in Anacortes, Skyline in Anacortes that may not be there right now. So we got to tell a story. It's not just the Marina Advisory Committee. The Marina's got to be somewhat accepting of this as well.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Councilor Munns, you still have the floor.
Yes. Thank you both very, very much. I appreciate that. Part of this, I think about people leaving the Marina, just my simple little view, is because the can has been kicked down the road so long. They like the Marina employees because they are there and they try hard, but they don't always have the replacement to put in. And so there isn't a trust that, okay, you raise the rates, what are we getting for it? Okay, the bathrooms have been cleaned and maybe the outside has been painted, but you go to the other marinas and in one shower facility for women, there's at least 2, if not 3 or 4 showers. And ours has 1.
Well, actually,
and I don't even go to where the liverboards do. I only use the guest marina. And so the other thing is the fuel pumps, they went out. And how many weeks did it take before you could pump fuel again? 2 weeks? 3. And so that's a big inconvenience. There's no one close to get fuel for your boat. And I know big boats come in there and they'll buy 1,000 gallons. And that makes money for us. But there's a Dee and Brian sometimes have their little convenience store. But generally, when you go and you fuel and you can pump out, you can buy ice there. You can get a candy bar there. You can get stale donuts from somewhere, and a very strong cup of coffee. But if you're a coffee drinker and you need it, you'll buy that Octane. But we don't have any things, and these are just small, little things. I understand, and I can see that we need to go big, but what if we did the Bradley plan, and then in a year's time, too many pulled out and we need to go to the compromise plan? Can we tweak it? I mean, once we make a decision, I hate to throw out when we have very intelligent people on this committee. They're educated, they've worked, they've been around, and they know boats, and they talk to the people on the docks. I talk to the people on the docks. And if they made a decision and then to not go with it, then why do we even have a committee? Why? It is like the art committee. It's just any committee that we have. Planning Commission, we've tied their hands pretty much now. It all goes to the hearing examiner. It used to come to us until we got into a sticky situation, but if we're going to have these, we need to listen to the people because we can't get around to everybody. We have 3 business people here just tonight, and they can't spend 100% of their time talking to everyone. They have to live and eat and feed their families and pay bills too, just like the city does. The other thing is the city's got to add some money. It used to be the 2 revenues were, and I know I've harped on this, is the senior center. They had to pay for their own roof. They had to pay for their own AVAC, and now we're buying all of that. They have a budget of $400,000, and the marina was lucky because of the art money. We're getting some money to help with dredging. If we want a marina, we have to help invest in it. And that means maybe giving up something else, but put a little bit more money. Grants can't pay for everything. They are helping. And we've got grant writer, we've got Brian here, and so it's all hands on decks. But I think sometimes the city needs to give, I'm sorry, a little bit more. This marina is a gym. I'm sorry, it can be a big EDC, and once the refiguration, they're right. But this is where I stand. How can we go against the advisory when the difference is maybe, what, $2,000 between the 2 collections? Okay, you're not really making any more money. So try it, and why can't we tweak it if in a year and a half, the data is there? Usually our data is 2 months behind on things, and then tweak it. But that's just a suggestion, and I appreciate the committee and Brian and Chris telling us what they see, what they know. And that's it. Thank you for your time.
Councillor Hoffmeyer.
First of all, Dr. Scooby, Mr. Jones, thank you so much for your time. Everybody else on the Marine Advisory Committee. Assuming we have the right individuals on a committee, which with the Marine Advisory Committee, I believe, actually, with the Marine Advisory Committee, I know we have the right members on that committee. When there is a unanimous decision from a committee, as a council member, I'm not going to go against that. So I support the Bradley rate, and I do kind of feel a little bit like we're splitting hairs, and I do very much appreciate staff and they're working inside, obviously. I hope the Marine Advisory Committee isn't feeling undervalued right this second, but that's where I'm at, is I support the Bradley rate.
Councillor Stuckey. I'm sorry, did you have your, I didn't see.
His hand was up first, that's why. Yeah, I did.
Okay, go ahead. Councillor Wittgenstein.
Yeah, thank you both to the Marina Advisory Committee and all your hard work, and I got to recognize staff for their passion and desire to, get this can kicked down the road quicker, or not kicked down the road quicker. See, I can't talk to it today. But the reality comes down to is, yeah, we're talking about a $3,000 difference between the Bradley and the BST, roughly, right? And this is, are these, one question, is this an annual or monthly amount? So it's like 88, 177?
I wish that was monthly.
So that's annual?
That's annual,
Okay,
though.
so, I keep hearing the same things, and I'm new to this game. I don't know the players as well as everybody else. What I hear is we have a marina that's the gem of the town, but we as a community aren't doing what we need to take care of it. That has to stop, no matter what. An extra 3,000 a year is a smaller amount than, it's a small number compared to the numbers that we see coming in here when we look at the dredging, we look at the infrastructure stuff that we have to deal with. I want everybody to feel validated and feel supported in this, right? We got to get this done no matter what. At this point in time, I would go with either or of those options at this point in time. I'm not completely made my mind up. And if I choose one or the other, it's not because I don't respect one business or organization or one group of committee over another. We do have committees to come advise us. Just because it's unanimous doesn't necessarily mean we have to go that route. We're up here to make decisions for the rest of this community as well, and people were using it. And I heard some great ideas tonight in both of these conversations about how we can restructure and restructure the marina in order to maximize some more revenue coming out of it. And I think it sounds like we're all on board on that. And maybe we light a match under that fire and get that going as well. And I think there's ways of, I think Mayor Pro Tem's suggestion of taking ADOC and turn it into a more feasible process at some point down the road as well to accommodate, our transient population, which is the military personnel that may not have a boat but have kayaks and canoes and want to store them for a couple of years while they're here and be able to use this marina in that way in the bay is an avenue for that as well. So, I do thank you for your time, but yeah, we got to get taking action on this. And this is, I think I've heard this presentation 3 times and I've been here 4 months.
Councillor Stuckey.
First, Brian, I appreciate your comments. It's what I call diplomatically firm, and I can appreciate that. It's really not a fun situation. I mean, on one hand, we have people we have paid who are experts in this to advise us. And just out of curiosity, can you remind me how much we paid for that study from BST or how much we're paying?
I want to say it was in the neighborhood of $10,000.
10 grand. Okay. And on the other hand, we have the people who live there, or at least use it, telling us something opposite. And if they had been on board with the BST, I'm going on the assumption we'd probably say, yeah, let's go with the BST. So I understand it's difficult, but I'm going to try to take emotions out of it and just look at it logically and business-like. Brian mentioned something interesting. I just want to confirm that I heard correctly. Compared to other marinas around us, there isn't a lot of capacity. Is that correct?
That is correct in the larger size boats. From about 32 on up, it's extremely difficult to find those size and larger slips in the Puget Sound.
And the smaller boats?
Smaller boats, if you start getting in 28, 24, those are available throughout the Puget Sound everywhere.
Oh, that changes things a little bit. So if the smaller boats were going to say, we don't like that increase, they could more easily find other slips than the larger boats.
That is correct.
Okay. I'm going to make a huge, broad, sweeping statement, and maybe I'm correct or not correct. If I'm someone who owns a 24-foot boat, or I'm someone who owns a 40-foot boat, is there a chance me owning a 40-foot boat means I'm more of an affluent income to take those rates? I mean, I know that's a sweeping statement, but does that logic generally hold true? I mean, you don't ask everyone how much they make, but is that a logical conclusion?
It is somewhat logical, although there are people that have
Sure.
large boats and small boats.
Or, they have money and they just don't want a big boat. I get that. I would say, given what I have heard, I would be for the BST option. I hate going against a committee. They are there to advise us. But I think the BST option, based on who could leave, who couldn't leave, I think that's the more logical, business-focused option, though it will no doubt ruffle some feathers, and that's unfortunate. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stuckey. It's one of the, raising rates for anybody is one of the most difficult things we do on council. It's never fun, never feels good, but it's just a reality of trying to keep things running. I think that previous council's unwillingness to raise rates even by a teeny bit, I'm sure it felt good at the time, but in the long run, it didn't do anybody any favors, because now we have all this deferred maintenance, and now the ratepayers are taking a big hit as opposed to adjusting to a gradual increase. So regardless of what happens, I would like to see us implement something like whatever percentage increase, annually, just because it makes sense that our expenses go up annually. It's just something that I think would be smart to do. So I'm also loath to, I don't want to say disregard, because that's not what we're doing. I guess to not accept the recommendation from an advisory committee. Our Marine Advisory Committee, you're one of the most active groups of advisory people to the city. You are the only ones that come to all of the meetings when we have discussions like this, and we really appreciate it. And the feedback and the work that you put into this is invaluable. Even if we don't go with your preferred option, it doesn't mean that your feedback has not been valuable and considered. I want to make that perfectly clear. So logically and rationally, this is a numbers thing. I think that because it's splitting hairs and the numbers are very close together, if we're splitting hairs, then it should be no problem to go with the compromise. I feel like the compromise is the obvious solution here. If we're, if we got people over here and nobody's willing to budge, but it's a reality that we have to do something, I think the compromise is the obvious thing to do. So that would be, I would support either the compromise or the BST, just because we need to be realistic. We need to listen to the people, but we also have to be realistic about what we need to do to provide services to the city. And, sometimes that's difficult to do, but it's just a reality and we have to accept it. So I don't want to, hit anybody any harder than we absolutely need to, which is why I'm leaning towards the compromise, for whatever that's worth. And I think that's all I had. Councilor Munns.
Thank you. One more question. Chris, what is the revenue difference between the compromise and, let's say, BS?
So if you look at the annual increase or the annual revenue, the difference is roughly $3,000, $2,500.
Okay, so one's 88, 177. The Bradley's 85, 153, and the compromise is 87, 441.
Yeah, oh, I'm sorry, I looked at the wrong one. The difference is about $1,000.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I was looking at the Bradley one, sorry.
Okay. I'd say the compromise combines the staff knowledge, what we paid for the thing, but also for the people who, big boaters, they've gone from small to larger boats, people who are living there, and I think, and it's not kicking the can. We've made it stand, we pay for something, and we go for it. And if we have to adjust it, we'll adjust it at a later time. But at least if we can vote next month and get it done and start collecting.
Question, on this, let's say we take, B and D dock and we do the side tie-up, right? Is that what I'm learning the language?
Yes.
I'm a lake boater, you know, so I go out fishing and, yeah, every once in a while I like to water ski, but, how big are those slips? What size of boats and we're gonna create more larger boats coming in. And, I mean, I'm hearing from almost everybody that that's what we need to do, which will generate, we get more money off the larger boats than we do the smaller boats, don't we, per month, I would
Yes,
assume?
yes.
Two-part question. If we left it alone, what would be the revenue difference per what we did do it? And you may not have that numbers for us right this moment, but I think that's kind of curious to know. And two, how long would that how long and what would the cost be to make that restructure happen?
Okay, on the first question, what would the revenue be? Paul is actually working on that now. I haven't received a final number on that yet. And on the second question, Moffett Nichols working on that, and I haven't received that information either. The important thing to remember about the small reconfiguration we want to do, removing the fingers on the east side of D dock and on the west side of B dock, is on D dock that's largely vacant except for June, July, and August when the crabbing season is on. And on the west side of B dock in the 24-foot category, that's where we have the small boat contract. That's largely full, but we're not really generating any revenue off of it at the prices we're charging. And then the other half of B dock is again in that 28-foot category, which is largely vacant for 3/4 of the year. So it surely would generate more revenue in the sense that larger boats would be there year-round, is our target.
Thank you. That's kind of what I think too. And even if we want to make everybody happy. We're not going to make everybody happy on these decisions that we make when the time comes to make it. And it's unfortunate, but I'm thinking 50 years from now, I want my great grandkids, because it'll be great grandkids by the time if they're here at that point, right? To be able to enjoy this gem that we have here in this community, as well as everything else that we have going for this community. And if we don't start thinking long term, we're not going to get anywhere. We're going to keep revisiting this every 3 years to raise rates to still be below the average in the state of Washington. And that's not going to get us anywhere quick. So at some point in time, we're going to have to take the gut punch and raise it, you know. And so I'm still leaning, at this point in time, I would lean toward the BST.
Yeah, can I add a little bit to that? I appreciate the long-term discussion there. In our business plan, we estimate the reconfiguration or redevelopments is ultimately it's a sliding scale. We can move things around, take off the fingers and do some of that easy stuff, but really it's at the end of its useful life. And so our rough estimate, and we're going to get some better numbers from Moffett Nichols here on redevelopment here, but right now we're working on a $30 million redevelopment, which is replacing the slips that we have, and then $5 million for the breakwater. And then total is what, $40 million we're looking for here when you add up the dredging, the redevelopment, the breakwater, and the channel. But we already started with a $5 million estimate for the dredging, and now it's in the 10 million. So you could probably double numbers and be more accurate. But just for rough numbers that are just kind of plug, there's quite a lot of investment here, and you cannot pass all the costs that we have going forward. The rates won't bear it. The recommendation is get the rates as high as they can, and then in the justification is to say we can't, we have to stay open, and so we maximize the rates, and then we have to get subsidy from other sources.
I appreciate that, and I guess maybe we'll have to do some fundraisers at Brian's business, and for this, to see if we can get some extra cash. I don't know. I'm gonna throw you under the bus. Yeah, I don't have the parking lot space that you do. So yeah, I appreciate that, and I know that we're going to have to look outside for other resources and whatnot, and there's other ways that give us the time to figure it out. I'm sure we can make this happen in some way or another. So thanks.
Councillor Stuckey.
Remind me, because I know we've touched on the redevelopment plan a little bit, this redevelopment plan would have more larger slips in it than smaller slips. Correct? Is that the thought process?
Yeah, if you're replacing it, it's easier to, you just replace it differently with the new configuration. And he showed a good example of it, and we haven't come up with a map, but he showed you at Des Moines how they pulled slips out, and they're transitioning. They were built under the same 1970s business plan that we were, which was smaller boats, and they're in the process of reconfiguring.
Sure. I mean, the point I'm trying to make is you look at the BST versus the Bradley. I admit, $3,000, that's a drop in the bucket. I don't even think it's worth us talking about for this long. However, if we're thinking longer term, that 3 or 4% would be a much bigger disparity in the future if we have a lot more bigger slips than smaller slips. I mean, letting you in my little window a little bit, I have a business. I've raised my rates a total of 3% in 8 years. Going back, I kind of wish I would have done a 2 or 3% every year, because I'd be looking kind of at that gut punch too of just one big increase. I think, you are better off with a lot of little increases, but I'm with Councilman Wittgenstein. Take the gut punch now and then go back to that. You got to do it at some point. You can't, if you keep trying to do 3% every year without this, it's just not going to cut the mustard, so to speak. That's all.
I have a final thought that I didn't mention. I am absolutely in support of using city funds, general fund, whatever, to support the marina or contribute to this project, because the entire community benefits from that marina, and it's all on the backs of the tenants. They've never contributed a penny toward that marina. And we have events there. People can use it. The people come and crab. I mean, it's just, the marina tenants are the ones paying for the jewel of the city that everybody gets to enjoy. So when it comes down to it, if we have something in reserves and we've got general fund, if we can pull something together, I 100% am in favor of contributing, because we're asking them to give a little or give a lot. And so we need to also be able to contribute and, reach the same, level of participation. So, for the record, I don't expect the marina tenants to pay for everything going forward. I don't think that makes any sense. Any other questions, comments? Thank you, and thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we've been here for almost 2 hours. Do we need to take a little break? 20-minute break. 20-minute break. How about a 5 or 6 minute break? We'll come back at 4.
What kind of fundraiser?
You should chime in. Chime in. Okay. Okay, we are back from our break. Thank you very much. Next up, we have development services, accessible dwelling units, residential zoning update, and our senior planner, Ray Lindenberg, will present. Is he doing it virtually?
Ray is doing it virtually
Okay.
has stepped away. It looks like he's busy.
Oh no, he took a break too?
Probably waiting for us to come back.
Okay.
Ray, are you back to your computer now? There he is.
Oh, there you, okay, perfect. Yeah, that was gonna be my backup. Okay, Mr. Lindenberg, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, members of the City Council. I'm going to keep it pretty brief today. We discussed this a little bit yesterday in the Planning Commission hearing as well. And so I'm going to just make this brief presentation. I'm going to put a presentation up on your screen there. It's a little bit different than the one I gave to you. Sorry about that. I had some additional information that I wanted to provide to you. And then we'll just have some discussion at the end. Essentially what's going to happen here is we're kind of pausing some of the work that we've been doing with some expectation that we'll have some assistance from the state to continue it forward. So what I'm going to do right now is put that presentation up on the screen, and we'll follow along with that. The staff report, I think, or your agenda bill said accessible dwelling units. That should be accessory dwelling units. But it's changing, it's morphing into a much larger project now anyway, so when we come back to you in the future, it's probably going to have an entirely different name and kind of concept. So just keep that in mind as we go through this process. So for our brief overview here, what we have is, this is coming out of our Affordable Housing Task Force from several years ago. Some of the changes that were recommended at the time were to make revisions to our ADU code, our accessory dwelling unit code, which allowed for the owner to live off-site and remove the requirement for recorded covenant. There are still other requirements that go along with it, and they're fairly typical for most cities in the state. One of the things that our ADU code is a lot more liberal on is the square footage allowed for an attached ADU unit. So that is something, everybody has their own kind of different styles as far as how those are presented. So that's kind of how Oak Harbor works. But at the same time, we haven't had a lot of ADUs constructed. Not really sure why that is, if there's just not the demand for it or people don't desire that here. We're just not seeing huge demand for it. And it is one of the ways that the state has kind of pushed municipalities into trying to encourage more people to utilize ADUs in a way of increasing affordable housing and density within urban growth areas. So that's just something to consider. We went through a potential rewrite that I think I presented back to you earlier this year. We were talking about different strategies or philosophies as far as how we wanted to rewrite an ADU code. There was concern about the Band-Aid effect if we made minor changes to the existing code, and that's why we talked about kind of starting from scratch and writing a whole new code. That being said, the state went through and passed some new regulations that talked about ADUs and also residential density. And so we kind of pumped the brakes a little bit and thought about, well, if the state's going to make new recommendations or requirements on residential zoning, then we should probably hold off and see what those requirements are going to be. Essentially what's happened now is the state is now requiring that municipalities of a certain size allow for 2 ADU units per residential lot. And you could have up to 4 under certain circumstances. And then there's also the issue of the missing middle housing bill that came through as well. So I'm going to go through those just a little bit, like I said, very briefly, and then kind of present to you what it is where our strategy is going to be for the future of this discussion. So at the state level changes, we had the 2 bills, the Bill 1110, which pertains to certain cities over a population of 25,000. And our population is not yet over 25,000, but it will be. We're at 24,900 and something right now. The requirement for this bill is if you're over 25,000 per the OFM projections, then you have to do these new requirements within the 6 months of the adoption of your next comprehensive plan cycle, which we're looking at in a couple of years. So we're going to be there. We should plan on being there, and we should proactively go through this process so it's not a situation where we have to scramble and make sure that we get it done in time, lest we get in trouble with the state. So that's kind of where we're at right now. We're considered a tier 2 city if we are at 25,000 or over. And essentially what that means is that you are required to have 2 dwelling units per lot for missing middle housing, and that's the Bill 1110, unless their zoning allows for higher densities. So essentially, single-family residential zoning is kind of morphing into 2-family residential zoning. And an important distinction here is that the state is looking at dwelling units per lot rather than dwelling units per acre. So we have our 3 to 9 units per acre for R1 that goes up to 12 to 22 units per acre for R4. What the state is now looking at is a distinction of dwelling units per lot. And that actually makes it a little bit easier for us from the standpoint of if we're going to allow for, increased density in residential neighborhoods, is that doesn't mean that we have to sit there and try and figure out averages. And what if, somebody putting 2 homes or 3 homes on their parcel brings us over a certain threshold? Where is that threshold measured, et cetera? Actually makes it a lot easier from an administration standpoint. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. There is an affordable housing component to 1110 as well. That says that if you provide an affordable housing unit on your parcel, you can do 4 dwelling units per lot, unless, again, the zoning allows for a higher density. Those affordable units are very strictly controlled. They have to be a certain time period, they have to be a certain price range, and those have to be recorded and kept too. It's not, just somebody saying, well, yeah, I'll do it, and then it just kind of drops away after a while. It's a very regimented affordable housing component that goes along with that. And to be perfectly honest, I don't know how many of those we would actually see in the city of Oak Harbor. Not sure if that's going to apply, but we still have to plan for it. We still have to have it in our code. So the next thing that the Bill 1110 includes is the missing middle housing types. And we're required to allow for 6 of 9. I'll read off the list of the 9 here, and they go through duplexes, triplexes, 4plexes, 5plexes, 6plexes, townhouses, stacked flats, courtyard apartments, and cottage housing. Those are all, what they consider to be the missing middle housing. What we are kind of missing out on in Oak Harbor is a lot of those types of things, the smaller projects, because we've done a lot of single family recently, and we've done some larger apartment complexes that are, 20 to 60 units. So there is that kind of middle ground that they're trying to focus on and provide more housing, more density, and more affordability, hopefully, in the long run. There are other provisions within this bill also. A city may choose to limit implementation of the density requirements to 75% of lots that are primarily dedicated to single-family homes if you are subject to certain conditions within this state law. We'll have to figure out what that is and see if that makes sense for us. There are exceptions to density requirements if you have critical areas and buffers, wetlands, things like that. We don't have a ton of those situations or steep slopes. Adequate water and public sewer, those density requirements might be reduced if we can't provide adequate water or public sewer service. There are restrictions on parking regulations and standards, and also restrictions on design review. Also, the SEPA categorical exemption is established for regulations that remove parking requirements for new missing middle housing. And we've also changed recently our SEPA thresholds, as you may recall, to allow for up to 20 units in a residential project without SEPA checklist review, which is a good thing, kind of streamlines things, makes it a little bit easier. But the good thing about this is the last item that they have on this list here is technical assistance. So the Department of Commerce is going to be offering help for municipalities to implement these new regulations. And so I'll talk about that, touch on that towards the end. The second bill that we're really focusing on is the ADU bill, that's EHB 1337. That one applies to all GMA planning municipalities, which we are one. That doesn't matter if we're over or under 25,000. Again, that one says that 2 ADUs are to be permitted, and there are other provisions that go along with that standard. And the additional standards on that are that you can't have a maximum size of less than 1,000 square feet. So if we have a maximum square footage for our ADUs, it has to be at least 1,000 square feet. There are dimensional standards limitations. We may not impose setback requirements or coverage limits or restrictions on entry door locations that are more restrictive than those are required for the principal unit. So one of the things that we had in our code that's going to have to go away is that we can't say that the door has to be on the side, because we don't say that for the principal unit. So there are some kind of domino effect things here that the state has put in that if they're trying to reduce the poison pills, essentially. They're trying to make it easier, the less arbitrary kind of regulations that cities have come up with that have kind of put a stop to a lot of ADUs in the past. We cannot require owner occupancy, which we didn't before. Local governments may not prohibit the sale or conveyance of a condominium unit independently of a principal unit. Local governments may not impose aesthetic standards that are more restrictive for ADUs than are for principal units. We have restrictions on how many parking spaces we can require. There's restriction on impact fees. So there's a lot going on here, and ultimately, staff is not comfortable with trying to kind of create our own code. But the benefit here and the cool thing is that the state is offering assistance, again, like I said, to provide model ordinances and assistance as far as making sure that we comply with these new mandates. So the interesting thing about how 1110 and 1337 overlap, providing the 2 ADU units that 1337 requires does not cover what 1110 requires. So these are 2 different kind of pathways that we have to follow. We can't say, you know, we're going to allow 2 ADU units, so therefore we are, you know, done with that missing middle thing and we can just move on with our lives. That's just not the case. So we're going to have to focus on both of those and provide new ordinance language for those. Again, the interesting thing here is that dwelling unit per lot, not per acre, is a different way of looking at development, and it's you know, kind of a new way of doing things. So we'll have to get used to that concept. And then the requirement for those different housing types, the 6 of 9 list that I talked about, we'll have to make sure that we are including ways for people to do those on those residential lots. And again, the ADU changes don't fully support those missing middle requirements, like I mentioned. So the ADU ordinance change has definitely morphed into a completely different project at this point. We're looking at overhauling our residential zone districts. And so what we're trying to do as we move forward is understanding what it is exactly that we need to do. And we're kind of in that process right now. And then we're going to work on a timeline internally to see how it is that we're going to present these to our decision makers, our planning commission and city councilors. And then the cool thing here is, as I mentioned before, the state is going to be helping us out. And one of the ways that they're going to do that is that they're working on a model ordinance that will be able to be utilized by jurisdictions that will fully incorporate the regulations in 1110 and 1337. That model ordinance is not required to come out until January 23rd of 2024. It might appear before then, there might be drafts, and we can work on that and kind of see how it all works out. So that's something that we're kind of aiming towards is January, to see where those model ordinances are going to direct us. The other consideration that we have right now as staff is we're looking at overhauling essentially the entire zoning code to provide for form-based code or something along those lines, perhaps a hybrid model. So we're looking at all sorts of different possibilities right now. Essentially what I'm telling you is the ADU rewrite is kind of dead in the water at this point. We will have to make changes to it based on what the state says, but those changes are not going to be anything that we are going to present to you anywhere in the next couple months or so. So this is going to be kind of a springtime project. We'll be coming back to talk about probably some larger wholesale changes to our residential zone districts that are going to incorporate those new requirements from the state. And it's going to be an exciting new project for us, and we'll see where it goes from here. But I just wanted to give that presentation to you so you don't think that we've kind of dropped it or forgotten about it or anything like that. The other cool thing that you see on there at the end is that there are possibility of grants to help pay for some of these things. I'm not sure if we're going to qualify for that because there are certain standards that are found in that section as well. So we're going to investigate all of this and kind of go through the process, and we'll keep you updated along the way. But if you have any questions or comments, things that you'd like to discuss or go over today, I'm available for that as well.
Thank you, Ray. This time I will turn to the council for questions, comments. Councilor Munns?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Ray, there are some neighborhoods, not all, that have like an HOA. In other words, you buy in the community and you're going to pay in, and they may help cut some of the grass or do this or this kind of thing. Some of them, you have to get permission before you put up their fence that they like the type of fence you're putting up. I mean, so what's going to happen? There was a state recently in the news that the HOAs have actually ended up taking away houses from people who've never missed a payment. They're always on time, but they got dinged because they planted the wrong tree. Okay, so they changed it, but it was never told to them that they had to still pay the fine. And it added up, and they were able to take away their house. And so now the state is saying, okay, we're taking away, so what happens to the HOAs that have been in existence? You're not supposed to do aesthetics, like which way the door, what side the door is on, or this or that. But I don't know about the neighborhoods here in our city, but I just know that there are some really picky rules, and I know of one community in the county that they have to approve the design for your house before you can build it and get your permits from the county. So I'm just wondering, how is this all going to go to? I appreciate all your work, and it's just around, and if somebody wants to accessory dwellings, that's great. But I just, go ahead, thank you.
Yeah, to answer your question, we will do the exact same thing that we do now, i.e. we will approve things based on what our code says. And if there is some sort of dispute between an HOA and a property owner, then that is the dispute between them. And that will always be the case. And HOAs sometimes overstep bounds set forth in the Constitution, quite literally. So, that is something that, will be a concern. It will probably come up at some point, but our code is based on what state law says, and we abide by that. If the HOA wants to impose additional restrictions, they may or may not be able to, but to be perfectly honest, that is not in our lane, So we will do what we need to do from a state law perspective, and make sure our requirements and our zoning code fit into that model. And anything outside of that, we will let attorneys get involved with that are not affiliated with the city of Oak Harbor.
Thank you very much. Just asking.
Sure.
Any other questions, comments from council? I've got one question. I can't remember what page it was, but it says 2 units required, 2 units required per lot or something, and that's not allowed per lot, it's required. Can you explain to me how that works?
Yeah, that would be a much better way of saying it, would be allowed rather than required. All of these things, so there probably is going to be a lot of concern when we talk to the public about this on a wider scale, that, is the state saying we have to have 4 units per parcel? No, that's not the case. If the market is demanding single-family homes, then people can build single-family homes. What the state is saying is that we have to provide zoning that allows for up to 4 units per parcel, or up to 2 ADUs per parcel. It's not saying you have to do it. It's not saying the city is going to push people into doing that, or the state is going to push people into doing that, or anything along those lines. It's just saying we have to allow for it.
That makes perfect sense. Thank you very much. Any other council feedback before we move on? All right, Mr. Lindenberg, you can move on with your afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Next up, we've got Finance, Washington State Auditor's Office, Financial Intelligence Tool Demonstration. And to present, we have our Finance Director, David Goldman.
All right, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, City Council, Finance Director David Goldman. Can everybody see the screen?
Yes.
All right, this will be short and sweet. The State Auditor's Office updated their financial intelligence tool to be a little bit more user-friendly and to show some more useful information to decision makers. So this is the landing screen for the financial intelligence tool. There's a few buttons you could click on. I'll just go to the individual governments because it's the one that I would use the most. And from here, you can type in a city, type in Oak Harbor, City of Oak Harbor. Select that, and it gives you some basic information about our city's finances. The last year of information that's in here is 2022. It has our revenues broken down by type, charges for services, taxes, and so on, and our expenditures broken down by type, utilities, public safety, general government, and so on. We have 29 indicators of financial health, and all of them are good. For example, if I click on general fund, you have fund balance sufficiency, change in fund equity, governmental fund sustainability, current ratio. You could click on this to find out what it is, and then it gives you a benchmark and it tells you what a good benchmark is. There's some on here where they have insufficient information. For example, debt load for water and sewer and so on. You click on that, it just says they don't have enough information available to make a determination. That was found on a few other cities as well. But overall, we don't have any cautionary or negative marks on our financial health. One can also search for other cities, like the first city on this list, I guess, you have City of Aberdeen. So here's another city we can look at. It has some concerning marks and some cautionary ones. If we want, we can sneak around to Anacortes. City of Anacortes, we can take a look at them. They're generally good, one cautionary and one concerning mark in their finances. Going back to the main page, you can also search by government types. There's all these different governmental types: fire protection districts, mosquito pest weed districts, and of course cities and towns. Click on cities and towns. It'll give you a total summary of all the revenues and all the expenditures statewide for all the cities and towns. And it'll show you that out of the 208 cities or so, 56 are good, 96 have cautionary measures, and over 100 have, like a what do you call those measures?
Negative?
Like red flag type measures. Yeah. And then 21, there's insufficient information to give them a good or a bad mark. So this is basically the tool. It's basically a general overview of different government types and their financial health, and their revenues and expenditures and other data as well. And with that, that concludes the presentation. We do have a way to download the detailed information for every city. There's a giant spreadsheet we can download if we want to do more detailed benchmarking and other types of data extraction and analysis for Oak Harbor compared to other cities as well.
That is very cool. Thank you. Any
Sure.
feedback from council? Councilor Stuckey.
I get the impression you brought this up to brag on Oak Harbor a little bit, but I approve. No, I thought it was a good tool. Man, it's comprehensive to have cemetery districts on there even. Complete curiosity, I noticed on the bottom of them, it talks about the accounting practices the city uses, GAAP. Isn't all cities do GAAP accounting? No. I'm saying all cities don't use GAAP accounting principles?
Not all of them. The smaller cities use cash. So there's cash-based, and then there's GAAP or kind of accrual-based cities.
Interesting. Okay, thank you. And good job.
Anybody else? All right, Mr. Goldman, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up, we have our fire department. Our Fire Chief Ray Merrill will present an update and projections for the Fire Station 82. Welcome, Chief.
Thanks, Mayor Pro Tem, Council. First thing I'm going to say is I'm not asking for any money. That's a good step. That's the way to be. I just want to bring you up to date a little bit on the direction the station is going. Now, I had planned to do an hour and 22-minute presentation. I'm going to cut it down to maybe 5. Maybe. But I'll do my, because y'all know I can talk a long time, especially when I get passionate about something. But I want to talk about where we're at with the station, let you know what's been accomplished and how we're moving forward to stay on track. I hope you've had a chance to take a look at the packet and the information that's in there. Of course, that's what our property looked like. You know that we finally closed on that on August 7th, and we took ownership of that. And with that, that's the property layout. It's kind of an interesting design when you look at the different corners in that property. We know there is a section on the very north end that we're not going to utilize a lot in the forefront, but at some point we will. This is what it looks like today with the old house on it. Interestingly enough, there's a 37-foot difference in height between the very north end of the property and the very south end, which created a little bit of a challenge when we started designing the facility itself. When we take a look from Swantown looking north, we've got about an 8-foot difference in height difference between Swantown and what we would consider to be our finished floor level where this house currently sits. We knew that going in, and that was part of our design feature. We knew that we were going to do some retaining walls, but I'll get into that in just a little bit. We did have the geotest company come out. They did 5 test pits. We did 1 infiltration rate test, and I'm supposed to know the results by the end of this week on how that all came out. Of course, it was pretty much glacial till, as we would anticipate here on Whidbey. There is hard pan down at about 12 to 14 feet down, which, again, we anticipated. Additionally, there we go. We did conduct an asbestos inspection that we have to do. All 3 of the buildings were inspected. We did find asbestos in the house, as we anticipated we would, because that house was built in 1941. And interestingly enough, it was only on the glazing around the exterior windows of the original house and some of the pipe insulation in the crawl space. We anticipated that the floor and most of the sheetrock or the muddy materials were going to have asbestos in it. They came out at less than 0.75%. 1% is the threshold. We were fortunate that it was just the glazing around the windows. That was taken care of yesterday, actually, and we got a clean bill of health on that structure today with all of the reports on the rest of the asbestos removal. So that's a good thing. And it's in this case, of course, we had to have this program turned in 2 weeks ago. That's why it says we're moving forward with the asbestos removal. That is done. We are working on abandoning the well on site. We know it's a hand-dug well, about 2 feet in diameter and probably about 40 to 50 feet deep. And we will get that abandoned. I'm waiting on the 2 bids to come in. Additionally, since this report was done, not on the well, but on the structure itself, we got our traffic study back. And when I was talking with the engineers and our architect, I said, is this a good report for us? And he said, it's an absolutely fabulous report for you. So we got a very good traffic study back, which results in, just for you, Mr. Stuckey, less money that we have to spend. As I told you before, I'm rather frugal at times. Public Works has been up, got rid of a bunch of the blackberries, got rid of some of the tall weeds, cleaned up some of the dead vegetation up there in order to make the site look a little better. The house, as you all know, we are going to do a training burn in that in October. Prior to doing the training burn, we're going to do some certified fire investigator testing, where some of our firebugs like to go in and set it on fire, and then we come back in and we test individuals to see if they come up with the origin and the cause of that fire. We've removed all of the appliances. We've taken them either to Christians. Some of the appliances were in very good shape, and we've taken them to Habitat so that Habitat can utilize them. There was almost a brand new washer and dryer and refrigerator, so rather than destroying those, we are going to try to recycle them. There we go. We know we're going to take the barn and the shed down at some point in the very near future. We had talked about contracting that out. We talked with Steve Beebe at Public Works, and he says, you know, I'd like to get out of the office for a day. And so Steve is going to work on taking the barn and the shed down. We are going to salvage as much stuff out of the barn as we possibly can. For those of you that like old wood, I went in and looked at the barn itself, and it is full-size 2x10s, 2x12, rough sawn, absolutely perfectly straight in that barn that was put in 1941. So we want to salvage as much wood as we possibly can. So some of our next steps is we're going to be getting our site plans and our grading plans submitted here very soon. I'm going over to Carletti's on Thursday of next week, and work with the mechanical engineers and the structural engineers on the final designs of the sub-foundations. We're going to be getting our building plans in. We're going to get our building permit in the very near future so that we can go out for site preparation and go out for bidding. We want to have our permits in hand before we go to bid, so we don't have a lot of change orders, again, to keep costs down, because we know change orders are expensive, so we want to make sure what we're looking for is what we're looking for. And ideally, we'd like to award the bid in December of 2023 and more than likely start construction in March of 2024. We know from experience, January and February are lousy times of the year to try to build in Oak Harbor. We know what this is what the existing item looks like, where the house is at, where the shed, where the barn are at. There we go. And we know what we want to accomplish. Originally, when we purchased the property, there was an assumption made that there was a shared access agreement with the property owners to the west. After going through all of the title information all the way back to 1931, there was never a shared access agreement, which in essence changed the design of our facility because we had already laid that facility out on a single level. But because we couldn't get shared access from the west, we had to put a driveway in on the east side, as you can see here. And in doing so, instead of a single-story building, we had to make it a two-story building on part of that structure. And just to give you an idea what the overall plan is going to look like. So this is the west elevation. You can see how it looks, where the access is, where we're looking at the apparatus bay, and you can see the grade differential in the structure itself. The stuff to the left will be the north side of the building. The stuff to the right is facing Swantown. And I should say, the one door that you see there in the lower right-hand corner, we have to be ADA accessible. And because of the grade level on this, there was talk of either having to put a lot of switchbacks in, a sidewalk, or figure out a way to make this building ADA accessible on both sides. By doing that lower door actually goes into a small lobby on the lower level, and then we also put a lobby on the upper level so it meets all ADA requirements without having to put an elevator or anything else inside of the structure. Again, to save some money. Pardon me? I'm trying. We're trying. Mr. Stuckey really questioned me on this a while ago, so we're doing what we can. And then we take a look at what it looks like from the east side. You can see where the three windows on the lower level, that is the bunk rooms on the lower level of the structure. You can see where the kitchen and dining area is upstairs, and the office is to the right of the picture, and the entry on the very right side of the picture. That would be the north side. So that would look like the north side of the structure. There's a parking lot on the north side. Again, ADA accessible into the lobby through the north side of the building. There we go. Oh, we lost a picture. There. And this would be the looking from Swantown, looking back at what we call the south elevation. The intent was to build this structure so that it it fit in with the environment of the neighborhood. We didn't want a real imposing-looking commercial structure. There's going to be some brickwork. There's being the doors themselves. Again, we're trying to find a color that is very smooth and soothing for the neighborhood that we're in. Again, we don't want to be obtrusive to the neighborhood. You can see where the apparatus bays are going to be, and then to the right is the living quarters. Upstairs, I'll get to the pictures there. This would be the lower level, the apparatus. You can see where there's 2 apparatus. You remember originally, in our original plan, we were going to put 3 apparatus bays in. After a lot of looking and deciding, we decided that we really only need 2 apparatus bays because we've only got sleeping quarters for 6 people. You can see where the 6 bedrooms are located. Restrooms downstairs. By the new standards, we have to have a decontamination room. We have to have a warm drying room for our bunker gear. That's all designed into the facility itself. You can see where the stairways are located. No, there is not a pole in this building, at least not from the 2nd level to the lower level. There will be a pole as an ornament in the lobby itself, just so people come in and you can see a brass pole, but it's not a usable brass pole. There we go. And then the upper level is kitchen, day room, the workout room, and then an office and a small conference room. And the design of this, we were looking at about 7,200 square feet all on one level. By doing this 2-story structure, we've reduced the footprint down to about 4,200 square feet. And then the 2nd story on top of that. That's pretty doggone good for me. And I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have. Again, I could have talked a really long time. I've got some plans, but as you can tell, I'm kind of excited about this project.
And you have every right to be. We're excited about it too. Thank you, Chief. Any feedback from council? Questions? Councilor Hoffmeyer.
With my background in construction and stuff and working on a lot of projects like this, very exciting to see how on top of all this you are. And I remember sharing with you a while back, Station 38 in Seattle, Hawthorne Hills. How much I liked the footprint of that building, but how well it fit in that neighborhood. And seeing the conceptuals coming along with this Station 82 is going to fit wonderfully in this neighborhood. So
we believe it's going to, absolutely. Yes.
Thank you.
Councilor Stuckey.
I was going to ask my traditional question of, are we still on budget? But I think I've got the hint.
I think you've got the hint. I think we're doing pretty doggone well.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Councilor Munns.
Bravo.
Thank you.
To you and the staff and everything. It's coming together pretty fast, and you're achieving the goals and to fit in also. So thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Unless anybody, I'm sorry.
Councilor Wittgenstein.
I just want to reiterate, thank you so much. It was great. I can feel your excitement, and I look forward to seeing the project get done.
As do I.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, moving on to administration. We have our city administrator's report, and to present, we have our city administrator, Blaine Oborn.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. It's always my pleasure to keep you updated with all the exciting things. You got a lot of reports here on a lot of things, but there's a lot more things we're doing. Just to kind of cover leadership here and kind of go through excerpts out of the report here. Classification and comp study, we implemented, of course, on October 1st, and so we just opened it up today for the employees to provide an appeal area that runs 2 weeks, and then we'll come back, and then we'll probably have some adjustments and update the council on where we go with that. One of the things we hosted is the city departments and tour for the candidates, something new that we've never done before. I've done traditionally tours for new council members, but I've had some inquiries here, and we have 2 of the people that went on that tour, 2 of the council candidates here in our audience on August 28th. We had a good group there, and we're able to go over and tour the various facilities at the city. And speaking of tours, staff, 15 staff members from the city were able to go to Anacortes water treatment plant that's in Mount Vernon. So that's where they take it out of. So really great state-of-the-art facility there, and just really they even had a charcuterie board. I got to say it right here. A little bit of hors d'oeuvres for us. So just a great project and a great facility there. And then we just completed on Monday the department director's retreat, and that was a great event there. And I cover some of the items we covered in there. So, and then also, I'm not going to go into all the various classes, but one of the things I find important here is to, when I go into conferences, is provide some overview and some written reports of what I learned and the value of those reports. So I gave you quite a extensive report of the various classes and kind of my summary there. Going on to legislative outreach, we hosted Representative Rick Larson, U.S. Representative Rick Larson, at the city shop on September 8th. Got some great feedback there and some great communication with him and his staff moving forward with a lot of the projects, Marina and some of the other projects moving forward. Moving on to economic development. The Economic Development Coordinator is leading the effort for the Central Development Area. That's kind of our new working name for what's called the Redevelopment Triangle or the Downtown and Marina. And then we also hired under the Mayor's Authority, a consultant that moved forward and help us with kicking off that the development of that plan. Over onto Development Services, mark your calendar for a joint meeting October 24th at 6 p.m. We'll ask the council to formally approve that additional meeting there. It's going to be, that's the usual time of the Plan Commission, so the plan is to have another joint workshop with the council and the Plan Commission on Tuesday, October 24th at 6 p.m. And I'll officially put that on the agenda, so council will recommend that you officially, on the October 3rd meeting, officially approve that extra joint meeting of the two bodies there. And so I think their Planning Commission was very open to that and really appreciates the opportunity to kind of work together. And they've got the staff, Development Services staff have some 4 great ideas to kind of work over together, and it just makes sense to do them together. So plan on that workshop. Moving on to finance here. I wanted to point out some lessons learned here. I think we had 2 council members that went to the budget workshop there from AWC, and they came out with a nice top 9 things we learned from the budget workshop. So I don't know if you'll agree with that, Councilmember Wittgenstein and Councilmember Hoffmeyer, but I thought that was interesting and went ahead and included it in my packet there. So, and then our Finance Director, David Goldman, has been appointed to the Government Finance Association's Committee on Government Budgeting and Fiscal Policy. So great work there. Congratulations there. The Fire Department, there's some notation there of upcoming event on September 30th. So go ahead and take that opportunity if that works for you. And then just Human Resources says we focus on the picnic. This is kind of a look back of a month, and so it seems like it's a lot of time, but it's still within my reporting period there. So great success there. Park and Recreation, in August, they were able to do a food truck pilot program, and I think that was successful. And then the foundation is hosting a holiday. The Oak Harbor Senior Center Foundation is hosting a Halloween dance party, so mark your calendar there. Moving on to other things in Park and Recreation, has completed the removal of a playground at Rich Haven Park due to deterioration and unsafe equipment. That one deteriorated a lot faster than they expected, so I think that's one of the things that council asked about why we did that. So, and then the mayor touched on already and reiterated the great staff efforts there in securing grant is the $1.6 million in the urban forestry grant. So congratulations to staff in getting that and being able to do some good things in the city on that. So, and then police department is celebrating a retirement of Captain Mike Bailey and joining them over there on September 28th at 3 p.m. And that's not at the police department, that's over at the Clean Water Facility Interpretive Center. And then lastly, Public Works Work continues on West Woodby Avenue and for the street and utility improvements, and that's almost done from what I've been told. So I will take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Oborn. I will turn to Councilor Stuckey.
I know you're giving us the brief version for time, but can we go back to ED coordinators leading the effort on the city's central development area plan? What does that look like tangibly? What exactly does that mean?
That's kind of a continuation of what you talked about when you did the joint workshop, and it's kind of a continuation of our kind of tying it into our public works director's statement that we're in a severe state of decay for infrastructure. So we're trying to do look at the areas, come up with a solution area there. It will probably tie into our multifamily tax exemption, which is looking for a residential target area. So what we're looking at is basically, council's already talked about Marina and the downtown being major issues, and then staff's kind of look at this older area where our infrastructure is worn, and how do you kind of tie that together, and how do you do it? In Washington State, they call it a sub-area plan. So what plan do you do? What incentives do you do? What zonings do you do in there? Ray's on board, could probably talk about this a lot better than I can, but we're going to certainly give you updates. We're developing a lot of the plans internally with staff, and then we'll come back. We'll have some components with the community on that going forward. And Ray, if you want, since you're there, you're welcome to kind of comment. I know he's real excited, and it's kind of a combination of macro development on the bigger picture, but then it ties it down to the micro development where we actually look at lots and what goes in there. And then Ray mentioned that form-based zoning. I think that's going to apply in that area too. So I think we're really going to try to drive some continuity there. And we're following a plan that other cities have done successfully to really do some very beneficial improvements in their city. So go ahead, Ray.
Yeah, so just from a brief overview, we're still talking about that general triangle between SR 20 and Midway Boulevard and then north of Whidbey. And so what we're looking at there is a wide-ranging, holistic view of that. We're talking about the utilities and infrastructure and all those sorts of things, and also looking at the concept of upzoning, increasing density in there, allowing for greater possibility of multifamily projects, mixed-use projects, looking at kind of applying similar concepts to what we have in our CBD zone district in other areas to revitalize the Chimes Corner neighborhood, increasing the ability of to construct commercial projects and mixed-use projects along Midway, doing larger residential projects in the central part of that triangle. So it's a very wide-ranging thing, and part of what we're going to be doing is the stuff that I mentioned earlier, is incorporating those increased density regulations the state is passing down to us in a way that makes sense for the city of Oak Harbor. So.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Hoffmeyer.
If at all possible in the future, and staff does a very, very good job keeping council in the loop on most things. If we're going to have to remove a playground like we did at Ridge Haven, it would be nice to know beforehand or as it's happening, even if that's through an email.
Yes.
And sometimes it can be something that's being moved that might not even seem very meaningful, like a rock. So I know you go down here on Pioneer. There was a property survey done, and there was a couple of city picnic tables moving. I'm going to assume that the Blarney Stone was moved to the same location as the picnic tables, but I don't know. Do you know? Where is the Blarney Stone?
I can get an answer for you on that, so we'll email you an answer.
Thank you. I'm assuming, because it was tucked in there right where those two picnic tables were at the top of the stairs above Alfie's. So I'm assuming when they moved those tables off of private property, they probably moved the Blarney Stone, but I would like to make sure that we are still in possession of that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other council comments, feedback? I just have one note about David Goldman's being appointed to the Government Finance Officers Association. The notes in your report say that he was selected, one of 25 people selected from a pool of 20,000. That's massive. Yeah, just enjoy the moment. Enjoy the moment. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so we will move on. We're still with our City Administrator Blaine Oborn about the creation of optional Deputy City Administrator position. Take it away.
Okay, one thing, let's load the slide here, and I'll just start talking in the interest of time here. So one of the things when you have people leave or potential retirements and those kind of things is to look at reorganization and look at how you can run more efficiently and do things. So in talking to our mayor and talking about having a potential succession planning to plan for, we talked about the idea of creating a deputy city administrator position. It's listed as optional because it might make sense now, so we're not bringing it forward if we didn't have an idea, but it may not make sense in the future. So one of the important things is staff assigned to this role. I mean, really need to be cohesive and part of the whole team there. And then we really believe there's a real opportunity here in the near future for this position. And then, like I mentioned there, it just varies depending upon the position. So on to the next slide here. It kind of look at the next steps here. Tonight, I'm just garnering your input on that. If there's a favorable input on creating this position, then it has to be done by ordinance, and we would amend the ordinance to do so. And then to appoint somebody to that position has to be done by the mayor and confirmed by the council, because this would be part of the public officials or the leadership or department head position. So, and then we also mentioned here, just in full disclosure here, is the intent is to promote the finance director to the assuming the council approval, as a deputy city administrator, and to oversee finance and development services. One of the good questions that was asked by a council member is, what would the cost be? And the cost is dependent upon whether we have a savings with a position opening or whether we do it with the current director there. So the costs range anywhere from additional $10,000 to a savings as much as $240,000. So I think certainly we want to lean towards the efficiency side and the savings side, but I have to kind of be in full disclosure. So I am looking at it. The kind of concept here is that cities, one of the things we've been criticized in the past and we've been moving away from is we kind of think small-minded and kind of operate as a small city, and this kind of transition us into a mid-sized city. We're a little bit more dynamic and look at opportunities to kind of consolidate, to bring expertise of joint things and to just be flexible in our organization, and also to do succession planning. So I really view, and I have the support of the mayor in creating this position to help us with these efficiencies and effectiveness.
Thank you, Mr. Oborn. Is that it? That's all
Yes.
we have? Okay, I'll turn to council. Thoughts, feedback? Councilor Hoffmeyer.
I can't say enough good things about our finance director, so pretty much with that statement, yes. I mean, I support this.
Councilor Stuckey.
A couple of questions and a couple of things to reiterate. I assume when it says plan is for DCA to oversee the Finance and Development Services Department, you mean in this particular situation. That doesn't mean 20 years from now, if we have this position, it's whoever's in charge of two departments, any two departments.
Two or more departments is what I would do the ordinance by, and I wouldn't define the departments to leave the flexibility opening. But right now, we have an opportunity. We're a finance director who also has experience in planning, and so it makes sense. But this is intended to be able to roll out, consolidate, but if at the future we want to roll through and do it differently, you can go back to 2 director positions. So it's not eliminating them, it's just kind of a way we're operating now, but I think we want to do the flexibility, so we can have, it may look differently 5 years, 10 years from now, so I think that's why I mentioned that my recommendation and the way I would recommend writing the ordinance this would be an optional position, recognizing the need to delegate and to utilize expertise. And David's already, when I'm gone, you see him here, and I'm going to be gone at a conference on October 3rd, and so he'll be here at this desk covering for me, so that's another role, and it'll just have him designated for that. There's not a huge cost here. This is really not a funding issue. It just really makes sense to utilize his expertise to keep him here and to kind of deal with it. I'm politically, and it's a lot of work to hire a position when somebody leaves, so it just kind of makes sense to ease in and try this out. So we can still have another director position if it doesn't work out, bring back the director position, but there's certainly a lot of flexibility here.
Because I just want to reiterate, I got a few phone calls about this, which kind of surprised me. It's not you, him, and the director in each place. The intent is for this to be someone who's over 2 or 3 departments, not to add one more layer of management.
No.
Okay,
You're
because that's the
right.
big thing there.
You're
Yeah.
correct. If we were a large city, so we're in this moderate range where there's a few cities our size that have a deputy or assistant city administrator or city manager position, but not a lot. So it kind of comes and goes. But when you start getting into the 50,000, 80,000 cities, then they usually have that. And then the real large ones like Dallas, Texas, I mean, it's all, the city manager has deputy city managers reporting to him. So we just kind of have to have some fluidness, and so that's why. And we view this as really an efficiency and a savings is the way we're kind of doing it. And succession planning, giving opportunities for other employees internally within development services to grow, and we can promote them without having to go all the way up to a director position and have some intermediary positions in between to give them some opportunities to grow and to develop staff. So there's really that's why I mentioned succession planning, not only for David, but for people within development service and also within finance.
And that all makes sense. Like I said, I'm just reiterating the point. And finally, if we are to do this, I understand that this is just a workshop, and then we create the ordinance, and then, has to be appointed by council, confirmed by council, appointed by the mayor. I just want to make sure that when we get to that last step, I'd like to know the entire cost situation. I mean, it would be logical that that individual will receive a raise, but then, like you said, there'd be some intermediary positions there. I need to know overall, is this a net savings or not, and what that would look like? I mean, you probably create a management position, so I need to know the overall picture before anyone's conferred to that position. Is it a savings for everything considered?
Yeah, and I put the existing org chart in there. I know it's a little bit busy, but kind of knowing where it is. I didn't really want to jump too far ahead without getting your input on moving forward, but certainly we can kind of have the organization chart kind of reflected of what it would look like together. Like I said, we're not merging the 2 departments. We're still having a development services department, still having a finance department area. They have separate functions, and they would continue to operate separately. So when we have it set up so that if we did away with this position, they would roll back to those 2 separate departments.
And my last question, if it's appropriate, because we obviously know who we're talking about, would our finance director be comfortable just confirming that he does have the bandwidth to do this? I mean, you're taking someone who's in charge of 1 department, now putting him in charge of 2 departments with some assistance. I know he's more than capable. I just want to make sure that I can hear it from him that, yes, he has the bandwidth to help run 2 departments and feels capable of having the skills for 2 departments.
Well, if you asked me a year ago, I would have said no.
We had a lot of staff turnover when I got here. Within 6 months to a year of when I got to the finance department, we, had a lot of turnover in the accounting and budgeting area. But we replaced all those positions. We were able to teach, learn, grow, do a lot of new innovative type activities, create SOPs, just really get a good handle on our financials and our budgeting techniques. So right now, it's in pretty good hands. As far as development services go, for the first 10 years of my career, I started out in the community development department. The city that I work for had about 47,000 folks when I started. When I left, it had about 140,000. I mean, I literally, I was the chairperson of the Development Review Committee. We had all the different disciplines on that committee, all the different folks in building. We had structural inspectors, we had electrical inspectors, plumbing, mechanical, we had police, fire, parks and recreation, landscaping, you name it, architects. We took into consideration all the different aspects of what a good development means, what would make sense for the city that I was working for. Took a bunch of meetings, usually per each master development plan before we got to the subdevelopments. And then we moved forward from there, but I must have been in charge of and reviewed over easily 10,000 homes and millions of square feet of non-residential space. And in addition to that, we were talking about form-based codes before. I was a member of the Congress for the New Urbanism, which is all about mixed-use, walkable communities, human-scale type communities, but with aspects like CEPTED, crime prevention through environmental design, with access for emergency services, just taking into all those items into consideration when developing these types of developments, these types of walkable, affordable type human-scale developments. And I'm thinking that I can kind of go back to that information that I have, tap additional information that's out there. I'm still a member of the APA. I'm still a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners. Work with the staff that we have now. Work with consultants when we develop that, or we might not even need a consultant and save some money there when we develop our form-based codes and pattern books and so on. But I did talk to their staff down in Development Services, to talk to David Kuhl, the Development Services Director, and he's done a lot. He's done a lot to bring that department forward from when it was when he first got here. Everything is really working well. It's extremely cohesive. People are communicating with each other. In addition, it's gone beyond just within the department. I mean, there's outreach to engineering. There's outreach to different departments throughout the city when it comes to new developments going on, and even city type projects occurring. I definitely, when the time does come, like to continue that and ensure that that grows, that we continue to include all the departments and also include maybe some departments that weren't as included in the past, like, for example, finance. One of the things that I worked on early in my career was fiscal impact analysis, which takes account the effect that new development has on cities' finances over a long period of time. So we can develop a model. I have developed models in the past, and we could bring those models to City Council to show them that, you're approving 20 or 30 homes. Here's what that looks like over the next 20 years. Here's what the possible impact would be to the expenditures, to the provision of police services and fire services and parks and recreation services. But this is the other side of it. Here's the revenues that'll be generated through one-time revenues like impact fees and SDCs, but also ongoing revenues such as property taxes, sales taxes, and so on, so that the City Council has another quiver in their arrow when they're reviewing development plans. So, but yes, I do have capacity. Thank you.
Thank you for that answer. We're lucky to have a proverbial municipal Swiss Army knife of skills in you. So, I mean, overall, I'm a cautious yes, not because of the individual, just because of the position in the future. But I think, in certain situations such as this, it makes sense. So, thank you.
Love the phrase municipal Swiss Army knife. Councilor Munns.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Mr. Oberg, why now? What if what if David Cool doesn't retire? What if he decides to stay on longer? Why now? Why before we have a new mayor? When Mayor Severance came in, he hired you. He decided he wanted to change. When Dudley came in, he hired someone else. When Jim Slowik came in as mayor, he kept the same one because it took Patty Cohen 4 tries before she found a city administrator she thought would fit for here. Why now?
I think as we talked about it, it makes sense now. In talking to the mayor, I had some hesitation. I kind of thought, well, we can kind of do an interim position and hold off and do that, but it made sense to go ahead and move forward right now, and I got the mayor's approval to do it. I talked to some council members already, talked to staff on it, and so it makes sense to go through it now, and start the succession planning now.
But if he doesn't retire, and I know how much work he's put in. There are no silos there. They all communicate. He keeps tabs. He knows where everything is in that department. And I just can't see. Finance is a huge department with a lot of moving things. And when you first came here, because of your development finances, you had to learn city, how to write amendments, how to do this, how to do that. And you depended on 2 of your main staffers that are gone now. One was transferred and one retired. When I look at the building officials, the inspection, the plans, we're still working through the software down there and stuff, how we can just lose him, even if he does retire, to not have someone down there. And the mayor is the one in charge of the staff. And then he dictates to city administrator, help me run the staff. This is what I want to see done. But if it's all going to change 1 January, why now? And I'm not convinced. Sure, if we don't have one department head, but if we hire one in 3 months, then we haven't really saved any money. We've only saved a little bit. We're saving some money because not all our positions are filled. We're missing water specialists according to that list. 2 and 1, and we're missing this, and we're recruiting some are vacant. There's 14 places. That's 14 months of money. Yes, hopefully we've been saying that. I've got answers from Mr. Goldman on that, but I just don't see the urgency. October is next week. We start voting in October. The 7th is the date, and then it'll be towards the end, and then you have December. Okay, if David Cool, I don't see it now. I just don't.
Okay.
I just think I'm just against it. Wait and see what happens. Not that he can't do it, but I just don't see it when we've worked so hard to build development services back up again so people can go to their iPhone or their pad and see where their permit is, where they are and being approved and stuff. And there's just so many intricate parts, just like in finance. If something goes wrong, someone gets sick, someone misfiles something, then you've got to go through that. What happens if there's 2 things down in development services? I'm sorry, they're 2 big departments, and I just can't see it for really, truly saving money if there's some huge mistakes made in either department. So, and I just think you need to wait to see who's on council, who fills these things.
Okay, well,
Thank you.
I'll agree to disagree with you, but I think I bring it forward because I'm passionate that we built a great team here. We continue to build a great team by adding this position here, and I think it's the right time, and I'm confident that who's ever elected mayor is going to want to continue with the great team that we have and build upon it as they implement their particular policies and objectives. So I'm confident of that, and so and I'm confident with the mayor, and I got his approval of the current mayor to bring this forward now. So I am, but certainly council, like I said here, it's up to the consensus of council whether we move forward or not. So.
Before we move on, I'm interested in the answer to the question, what if David Cool doesn't retire? What happens?
We would continue with it, but he's going to retire sometime. I have a commitment from him. He actually was originally proposed of retiring on September 1st. The mayor asked him to stay longer, and then he's kind of elected to stay a little longer than that. But I think in looking through it and looking through going forward, I don't see him staying on a long time. I think in the interim time, we can kind of work this through. And do the development of this idea and kind of see where we want to go. So I mentioned a lot of times just flexibility here and kind of how you adjust with positions, and we've been able to bring on a lot of great positions here that did services that weren't being done when I was here, like the economic development coordinator, our grants administrator. We've been really upping our game, and I think this is a really great opportunity, but risk is risk. So, and one of the things you have to do in this business and leadership is to take risks, try things out, and if it doesn't work, you adjust with it. And so it feels like it's the right time, feels like it's the right opportunity to move forward. Political things are always that way, but you can't always stop everything for political games, and it just slows down the whole issue here. So it just felt right to do that initiative. But certainly I value your question, and I think with a change in mayor, that's a legitimate concern.
So we would do the ordinance and create the position, but nothing would actually shift around until development services retires.
In the intent is, if you give me the ordinance, I intend to go right out pretty much the same time. I already have the person and ask you to appoint the person to that position. That, in full disclosure, that's my intent. It might adjust, but in full disclosure, that's the plan right now.
Okay. Thanks for letting me jump in. Go ahead.
So no one else in the city could apply for this job. You've already decided who's going, and not that nothing against you, Mr. Coleman, but usually when there's an internal hire, it is open up to everyone to apply. And so you're taking away that. You've picked the one and you ask the mayor to accept. I'm sorry, I just think this is out of the blue. I think it's way too fast, and I don't think we're really gonna save money. I think we'll end up in trouble by not having two very competent department heads to handle it, because they're big departments. And you are supposed to be managing all the department heads. So now you're gonna have a sub-department head, oh, well, will you take these two departments and I'll do the rest of these? So you're gonna give up part of your salary? This just doesn't sound right. I'm sorry. It doesn't sound right or what a council should be doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Wittgenstein.
I think we're hitting around on what is your exact timeline on bringing this forward if the council were to be on board?
If we get the favorable approval here to move forward with the ordinance, then I would put the ordinance probably on the October 17th. And if the mayor gives me approval, I would do the requested appointment on the 17th, the same time, October 17th meeting. Is that right, Julie, or is it? Yes. Yeah, October 17th is my plan. So, and you could do the ordinance and then not approve it. I mean, not approve or there could be a consensus to hold off on it. So I'm just getting input. I'm just telling you your plan, so you can kind of give me input on it and whether you want to go in a different direction. So.
Yeah. So I've spent a little bit of time in different organizations, and when we're getting up on rotation of leadership, this smells like a fish, just to be honest with you. I don't have all the emotional background. I'm not saying it's not a good thing or a bad thing. I think the timing is what's suspect. Okay. And so, in my opinion, and if I get a say in this, I'd like to see the decision wait till after the election and the new administration is sworn in, whomever that may be.
Well, I could do the optional ordinance right now, and that's not making an appointment. Would you be okay?
But that's not your plan. I mean, I'd be in favor of looking at the ordinance if it's
okay
and whatnot and having a discussion, but I don't think we need to rush it, is what I'm saying. We've got 2.5 months, right, with meetings. So we're talking, 4 more council meetings and 2 workshops?
Yeah.
I think there's plenty of time to tease it out, make sure it's the right thing. We have more other council members that aren't here that can't really give their public input. Whether they've met with you privately or not doesn't matter. I think it needs to be a matter of record, is where people think, and that we get to hear what other people are saying as well, because we helps guide that process. For me, I would not be comfortable with it, and trying to get it done by the end of October. You're talking 2.5 weeks.
Okay, all right, thank you for your input.
Thank you, Councilor Wittgenstein. I have a couple of questions. When you and I spoke earlier, I must have misunderstood, because I thought that the deputy we were just going to take an existing department head and designate them as the person to fill in for you when you were gone, kind of like we picked a person to be the mayor pro tem when the mayor's gone. And that made perfect sense, because it makes sense that we know exactly where to turn, if somebody is out of town or whatever, and, it allows for consistency. So I think that we absolutely need to do that.
Okay.
But I am, I've thought about it, and I'm a little concerned about assigning a single person to 2 full-time jobs plus. Like currently there is a full-time entire human in development services, there's a full-time entire human in finance, and we want, those are, they work every day, all day, and so I'm concerned about how we would assign that plus the deputy city administrator stuff to a single person. I think that if there is any single person that's capable of that, it's definitely David Goldman. But what happens when he retires? I don't know, I'm concerned. And I'm also concerned about whether or not we've talked to the staff in development services and finance, and are they comfortable with having basically a third of someone's time when they're used to having a full-time person in their space to turn to. So that's just kind of me thinking out loud. What I don't want to do is take our municipal Swiss Army knife, and I appreciate you're trying to capitalize on his experience and his value and his talent, and 100%, we need to utilize every bit of that. But what I don't want is to take such a valuable asset and spread him so thin that he gets burnt out. That's what I don't want to happen.
So what I did mention subtly, and I can touch on it a little bit more, so we're looking at bridges. So taking some of the people who grow them internally in development services and in finance to take a more active role in some of the issues, but don't have to go all the way up to the director role. So that's what we envision doing there, and kind of dealing with this. And so so it's not exactly the same, because we're delegating, we're taking some people who are make an associate planner or a senior planner, and making one of them a manager over planning, and then making taking some of the savings of that position and applying it to having people at a higher role and responsibility, and kind of setting it out. So that's the way we kind of envision dealing with it to address the concerns. So you don't have a deputy city administrator having 40 people or 30 people reporting to them directly like it is now. You have 4 managers reporting to that individual and doing it. And then you're kind of doing succession planning and giving opportunity for growth for some of the people, like I mentioned, who might like might be attracted to the manager position, and very competent and able to kind of go that, but not really. If we were to open up the director position, those people wouldn't be probably have the skills to apply for it. So in that's the reason why we got some favorable input from some of the people in development services and in finance, because we're operating that kind of bridging position of development.
Okay, if we're going to distribute the workload,
yes,
a little wider, I feel better about that.
Yeah.
And I love the idea of allowing for some upward mobility in the departments to take on a little more responsibilities. That's good. I'm not entirely sold on the creation of it yet. I think it's worthy of a little more discussion, but I do agree with Councilor Wittgenstein that it would probably make sense to implement after the first of the year. Just because it's a big change, and if we're going to have some turnover, I think that it would make sense to wait till they're in place. So I'm willing to consider it. I think it's interesting, but I do think that we should hold off on it for a little while.
Yeah. And if we did have some retirements, then I would probably hold off on filling it and do some interim, which the mayor can do up to 6 months.
I think that would
Yeah.
make a lot of sense. Sure. Okay, Councilor Hoffmeyer.
Yeah, I had one more thing. The city administrator and the mayor and, with council this last 2 years have built one of the best staffs I've ever seen in this building. And I can't fathom the next mayor not wanting to build upon that success. And I think that's what Oak Harbor will see regardless of the election. I wanted to hit on one thing you said, though. The city administrator. The city administrator had said that, by promoting our finance director to this position, it allowed us to keep him longer. I don't know if it would be permissible to ask him, but are you actively reading the classifieds? Are we going to keep you until January? If I'm allowed to ask
I'm
that.
committed to staying in Oak Harbor. I like Oak Harbor. I arrived here 3 years ago, and it's been a great experience. The people I'm working with are great. The council is cohesive. They get along. They have their disagreements, obviously, but the council does communicate and talk, and is very is very forward with staff. It is able to explain what they need, and we're able to get them the answers that they're asking. So, I can speak for myself and other members of staff that we do appreciate that, and we have a great team. I mean, council, the mayor, Blaine, have built a really great team, and I really, I really like it here. So.
That's wonderful to hear. Thanks for being willing to answer that. I will sleep better tonight now, and I certainly agree with others on council that there doesn't seem to be any harm in waiting until January.
Councilor Wittgenstein.
If it's permissible to kind of ask this, because with this conversation, I'm hearing, potential restructuring of the supervisory management roles within each of these departments in order to accommodate one person on top, right? So for me, we spent an hour talking about a marina dredging, and it's been back 2 or 3, 4 times to this council and workshops in order to get this teased out. I'd like to kick this can, because we've been using that thing all day, so it's not derogatory stuff. I'd like to see this come back to another workshop with much more detail and much more explanation of how this looks, what the numbers are. I mean, before we even go to the ordinance piece of this, right? Because I think there's steps that need to be taken, and we have a process in place. Let's use that process. I'd love to see this in another workshop, whether it's October or November. We can leave that up to your guys' discretion. But again, I'm strongly agree that we need to make this not effective until after the 1st of January.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Stuckey.
I'm glad you reiterated that part about having management positions, because that can give some people incentive to stay because there's other positions to go to. My other 2 thoughts are, again, you just got to make sure that it's still a net savings with all those additional positions and moving around and things like that. And if talking about this specific scenario, I would need to know that there's in writing a date that the planning director is leaving. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having a little overlap so they can chat things out, but the idea of he's going to leave soon, it needs to be known. For me to vote beyond the creation of the ordinance to actually appoint him to that position, I would need to know what is the day that planning director is leaving, not let's bring him on and it could be 6 months, 8 months, we don't know. So just to make sure we know where I'm coming from, I need to know the date that that's going to be available. So, but I'm okay with going forward with the ordinance at least.
Okay.
Thanks.
Any other comments, questions, concerns, feedback? Thank you. Good discussion. I appreciate the discussion, and Mr. Goldman, we appreciate your candor. Thanks. All right, so moving on. Was that Mr. Oborn, was that everything you had on that?
Yeah, very good, and
Okay.
I appreciate the input, and that helps me kind of know what I need to do to bring back to you, so appreciate that.
Thank you. Anything from council for the good of the order? Any council comments, questions, requests for future agenda items? The ribbon cutting. We'll see. Okay, well, seeing nothing further, then